Good morning. I'm Amy Levy, and I'm excited to spend time talking with you about the people side of your business. How many of you feel that that is your strength in your practice? A couple. Good. Well, you'll have an opportunity to share your knowledge with one another. I'd like to take a minute and just go around the room. If you could share your first name, the practice that you have, and how many employees, that gives me a feel for some of the questions you might have, and I can share examples that will be applicable to your business. Christine, would you like to start, please?
My name is Christine Radisky. I am the hospital manager at Aurora Veterinary Clinic in Aurora, Ohio, and I have 35 employees, including me.
Great, thank you. I'm from Toledo, Ohio, so welcome. Yes, welcome. Hi.
I'm Bill Short.
Bill?
Yeah, and I'm a patient work rep in Greenville, South Carolina. I have 150 hospitals.
Oh my goodness, you're in a big area. Kelsey.
Kelsey, I work here with Denver at East Library House in Bullet, and we have 15 employees.
Thank you. Thank you, welcome. Brittany.
I'm Brittany. I manage the family pet hospital in Ashland, Massachusetts, and we have 18
Jackie.
Jackie Roots there. I work at Pet Cardio Veterinary Cardiology here in Wheat Ridge. We have 2 doctors and 3 technicians.
Oh, nice. Oh, yes. Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Messina. I'm the team lead of President in the hospital, and Melanie, and we have 9 staff members, and we do large and small.
Great. Well, welcome to Denver. Andrew.
I'm a professional service veterinarian for Veterinary Illinois. I work with 10 reps in Southern California. We cover about 9 hospitals.
Oh, you're busy. Great, thank you. Jolene.
I'm Jolene Walter, and I'm volunteer veterinary clinic in Illinois. We're 16.
Great, thank you. Jean.
I am office manager or office administrator. 16 employees,
Welcome. Hi,
I'm Yara Marshall from Colorado.
Close.
And I'm currently in between. Previously, I managed some practices up in some county, Park County, and then I was a director at a hospital back in New York.
Welcome. Kelly.
I'm Kelly Boyd. I work at Jefferson Animal Clinic as practice manager in Arvada, Colorado. And we have 14 employees.
14. Great. Thank you. Heather.
I'm Heather Taylor. I am a vet in our small practice in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have 16 employees.
Laura.
I'm Laura Esselman. I work at Alma as the senior manager of the publishing department. And I have there are 5 of us in my department, and we're about to increase to 6.
Well, congratulations on your soon-to-be new hire. Amy.
I'm Amy. I am from Alabama, and I manage practice with 7 employees.
I go by NJ, and I'm with First Pet Veterinary Centers in Phoenix area in Arizona, and we have about 185 employees now.
Thank you. Dara.
I'm Dara from Ogden, Utah, and we have 27 employees at Birch Creek Animal Hospital, and I'm office manager.
Welcome. Thank you. James. Or is it Jim? James? Okay.
Great.
20. Thank you, Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Fishley. I work at Royal Island Hospital in Franks, New Jersey. I'm the practice manager. I oversee 100 employees, and we have 325 employees.
Big operation.
President Model,
I work for Merck.
I'm Tina Bearden, manager for Bearden Animal Office Veterinarian. So I work with 8 reps, and we cover about 4.
Mercy.
I'm Mercy, and I work as a hospital administrator in San Francisco, California, and I have about 55.
Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer. I own 3 animal hospitals in Florida, and we have 45.
Thank you. Mrs. Herbert.
Perfect.
Also with Behringer Ingelheim, as one of the veterinarians, I support 8 reps in the North and Central Texas area, so covering about 800 or so hospitals.
Territories. Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Johnson from St. Louis, Missouri. Hillside Animal Hospital, 19 employees. Private manager.
Thank you. Amy?
Oh, I'm also a professional service veterinarian with BI, along with these guys. And I live in Boston, Massachusetts, and I work with 8 territory managers in New England.
And Kimberly.
I'm Kim. I work for the Animal Hospital in Redondo Beach. We have 25 employees. I'm the practice manager.
Well, welcome. This morning is going to be very interactive. My background is I have over 25 years of experience in human resources working for a variety of industries. And I appreciate all the questions that you have up here. Please add more. Feel free to ask questions throughout our time together, because my goal is for you to walk away feeling like I have some actionable items that I can take back to my practice to help grow my business. My focus, and why I call this strategic human resource management, is I use human resource tools and processes to help companies grow their business. And a lot of you I've heard are, we're adding a person, or it sounds like you've already grown quite a bit, and now how do we manage that growth? So we'll be focused on 3 areas today: selection and recruitment, which is always a hot topic, especially in today's competitive environment. Compensation, and I think out of all the groups that I've had an opportunity to facilitate, you guys have had the most comp questions, so I'm really looking forward to visiting with you about your comp questions. And then our last section will be onboarding. And it sounds like some of you onboard 1 employee at a time, others may onboard a group, and so we'll talk about some best practices, some tools to help make that process more productive for you. And as I said, please feel free to ask questions throughout our time together. Okay. As I say, is it moving? Not yet. Let's try this. Okay. There we go. So when we talk about recruitment strategy, and before we begin to select an employee, it's helpful if we take some time to reflect on our practice or the hospital that we work in, because each practice and each hospital has its own culture. You have your own unique communication style. We have similar processes that we use when caring for our patients as well as their owners, but each of us will take and have our own unique touch, our own unique spin as to how we interact with our patients' owners, how we want to communicate and build relationships with our clients as they come into our practice or into our hospital. So the first thing we need to do is think about our practice and our culture fit. And as you think through your organizations, I'm sure top of mind are some employees that they were a great hire. And hopefully they still are. They've stayed with you. And they just seem to get it. They had that natural fit that they connected with our clients when they brought their patients in. They had the unique ability to balance caring for the owner as well as caring for the animal, the pet, that's like a family member to that owner. They also understood the technical needs of the job, and they got along well with their team members. They were your perfect hire. And then most of you, and if you haven't, you'll be a rare person in the room, because I certainly have hired someone, they interviewed great, you were really excited, they walked in the door and you thought, who's that person? Where did they come from? And they're not a good fit. They don't get along with their coworkers. So it helps to spend some time thinking about what is it that made one person a great fit for your practice, and what made that other person not a great fit. And that usually means they're not a bad employee, they're just not a fit for your organization. And usually about 40% of the turnover that occurs within the first year is because of culture fit. It's not that they can't do the job, they just didn't fit the culture of our hospital or our practice. So it's helpful as owners and practice managers to think about what makes your practice unique, because all of your practices are very different. And what skills, what behaviors, what characteristics are a good fit for you? And then to interview for that, because no one's the perfect fit for every job, but they're the perfect fit for a practice. And so it's finding that culture fit. Think about those behaviors for success and what really differentiates an average performer to a star, so that you can screen and hire for your stars. And also think about, do you have a team? So being a team player, being collaborative is really important for your practice. Or are you a practice where it's usually a one-on-one relationship? You have one employee working with one animal and one owner. And so you need those superstars, the people that are self-motivated, that are those individual contributors that'll take the initiative and take care of that animal, that owner, in a one-on-one situation. Both are great employees. It's just what's your work style, what's your habit, and your culture. And then I also encourage business owners to think about diversity of thought, because one of the common things I hear is, oh, they reminded me of myself at that age. They're going to be fabulous. Of course I hired them. Well, if we hire people like ourselves, which is a good practice. I mean, we're doing a good job. We're a manager in the business. We tend to always get the same thought, the same perspective. So think about the different opinions on your team, the different perspectives that people bring to problem solving, to patient care, and look for what gaps do we have that we might want to close in terms of the knowledge set on our team or the perspectives on our team. And how do we add diversity of thought to help different owners feel more comfortable coming into our practice and have people that connect with them? As I'm interviewing, I look to see, does our workforce mirror the clients that we serve? Do we mirror our population? And if so, there's usually a pretty good fit. You'll have satisfied customers because they'll connect with your employees. And if we have a gap, then what do we do to close that gap through our hiring process? And I can give you an example. I worked with a practice that was in Garden City, Kansas, and I know you were from Missouri. And Garden City is 60% Hispanic population. They didn't have any bilingual employees on their staff. And so they were missing 60% of the community in terms of providing service and caring for their animals. And as soon as I think they hired 2 bilingual employees, and their business more than doubled because they could connect with the owners. They could reach and talk to them and explain in the owner's native language what was going on with their pet and how to care for them. So think about diversity of thought as you're planning for your interview. And then what are the job skills that are absolutely critical for this position? What's the nice to have? And make sure that you screen for those. What thoughts or questions do you have? Is this a process that you're using today? We need more coffee. Okay. So when you think about your referrals, your recruiting sources, do any of you currently offer an employee referral program? A couple, can you share yours, Mercy? What do you offer? Mm-hmm. $150, great. Does anyone else? And I like that you have a retention piece built into your referral program. That's really smart. Do you pay the referral upon hire and then the $150 bonus after 90 days, or is it $150 after 90 days? Okay, so you build your referral and your retention together. Great, great approach. Thank you. Any others? Yes, Jennifer.
Anyone referring an employee or an employee referring a potential employee?
Yeah, so great clarifying question. So an employee referral program is if an employee of your practice or your hospital refers an applicant who's hired, and then typically you want to include a retention piece in that referral bonus. I've seen anything from 50 to 250 is kind of the range, so your 150 is right in the middle of that. It depends on the size of the practice and your financial position, but it's a great way to increase your applicant pool and attract those passive applicants who aren't currently looking, but they have a friend or someone that they went to school with. If they're veterinary tech, they may have been a classmate and they say, you know, that person was a really good student. I would love to work with them. And they'll call their friends and encourage them to come to your practice so that they can work together. And that's cheaper than placing an ad or going through an agency. And so it's usually a great source of high quality but passive applicants who aren't going to respond any other way. But it is something that's fairly uncommon. So you might consider it for some of your hard to fill positions, because some organizations offer it or practices offer it for certain positions, but not all. So you've got that flexibility. There was a comment about social media is becoming more and more prevalent as a recruitment source, and that is certainly true. Here's a listing of some of the most common job posting boards. Right now, LinkedIn is probably one of the most popular sites for finding both passive applicants as well as applicants that are currently actively seeking other positions, because you can do searches to see who's identified themselves as a veterinary tech or a veterinarian that you might want to reach out and connect with. Indeed is another popular site for both technical, professional level positions, and they can reach out to candidates as well on your behalf. You can do resume searches in their database, which is really helpful. A lot of local Chamber of Commerce websites have a job board where you can post to broaden your scope. You could get on their website and post if you're doing a national search. That can be helpful. If there's any regional or state veterinary professional groups, I encourage you to post on their website because they speak to your target audience. And usually that's where people look when they're actively seeking jobs, or college and technical schools. If you're in a rural community, it's really helpful to post on community boards in stores and churches. That's a great source for passive applicants who are out shopping and will see your posting. Also, the newspaper. How many of you still post in the newspaper? A few, yes. It's not as common as it used to be, and I usually get why would you do that when social media is so active? And with the millennials, typically they're not going to read the newspaper, but their parents will. And that's been a great referral source. I've hired more young millennials who said, my mom saw your ad in the newspaper and she said, you need to go apply for this because I want you to make more money so you can move out of my basement. And so mom and dad have a lot of influence over the younger generation, and they'll read the newspaper and talk to their kids about it. And I also am hearing more advertisements on the radio. Are you seeing that in your communities? Or not quite so much? Okay.
Not locally. I have Sirius, but it's more like national companies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then any local companies? Yeah, that makes sense. Where else are you posting? What's a good recruitment source for all of you? Yes. Go ahead, Jennifer.
We use iHireVet.com.
Great.
Technicians use it. iHireVet.com. Yeah. We've gotten a few from there.
And the quality of applicants been really been high? Good.
It's a direct target to what we need, so.
Perfect. Thank you. Jennifer.
I post on VIN, for a number, it's free.
Mm-hmm.
There's a site called VeritasConnect.com, and I also post on AGMA. I am not successful at any of those, so I'm just letting you guys know. I paid for the Vertex Connect. I got 2 resumes that were not great. AVMA, I got 0. So.
What's been your most productive recruitment source?
People just coming in.
Okay.
Building. I have had a lot of, well, Indeed, maybe Indeed.
Okay, indeed.
But depends on what you post on Indeed. If you're posting for an experienced technician, you're going to get 5 applicants. If you're
Right.
posting for receptionist,
Oh,
you're going to
yes.
get 350. right?
Yes, you will.
Oh, God. And then if you really want the good stuff on Indeed, they want to charge you $1 million for it. So,
Yes, and are the 5 that you get for experienced, is the quality pretty good?
we have gotten like 1 or 2.
Okay. So you get a small pool, but you can usually find one person to hire. And you're right, receptionist, the pool is incredible. Yes. Mercy. Craigslist? Oh, okay, sure.
We've always used Indeed, but we used the free one until 6 months ago, our last hiring, we sponsored our posts on Indeed.
Right.
Got the best applicant pool we've ever gotten in the history of the company.
Oh, good.
It means you have to pay for it.
You pay per everyone who clicks on, so it keeps it at the top of the search, and anytime someone clicks on it, you pay however much. You can set a limit to how much per day you will pay.
Mm-hmm.
But it was literally like we had to not hire people who we normally would have because we didn't have enough positions. Wow.
Oh, that's great. Where did you set your limit? Do you mind sharing?
I think it was like $5 a day. Was my max.
Oh, that's
And
really
it was
reasonable.
It was live for maybe 3 weeks.
Okay. That's very reasonable. Yes.
I will never not do that.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Any other? Yes, Phil.
There's a website called animalhealthjobs.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of industry, but they're also, I see, job postings for veterinarians and things like that on there as well. So it's animalhealthjobs.com.
Great. Have you used it for any of your searches or for the hospitals
industry,
that you
so-
work with? Have you referred them?
Yes, so hospitals that I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you'll see a lot of postings for veterinarians and veterinary technicians and that stuff.
Great, great, thank you. Any other, yes, Tina?
Yeah, I refer a lot of people, I don't know how it is in other states, but I refer a lot of people to the local VMAs. So local VMAs send out a newsletter in Pittsburgh. We have 3 local VMAs in Pittsburgh, so that's probably helpful. But they send out a monthly newsletter and then with any CE things that they're offering, and then there's a whole page of, I mean, it's mostly for veterinarians and vet techs. But I have seen, people wanting a receptionist or people wanting a head tech or practice manager or something. I think those would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Karen?
That just made me think of something that comes up a lot, but like your sales team, your sales reps that come in, they're a great resource too, because they'll often know somebody who's moving into the area from another part of their territory that might be looking for a job.
Thank you for the suggestion. Any other tips? Yes, MJ.
We have a big, pretty decent webpage on our site that is for recruiting, so we do get a fairly decent amount of candidates for people who move from out of state or bigger hospitals as people are looking for places to work at.
Great. So you have a job posting board on your own website, and it sounds like it's you get a lot of traffic. How many hires have you received from it? Do you know?
I actually don't know because I don't do that, so I haven't tracked
Oh,
it,
okay.
but over the years it's
Great.
been the local association ads or any of most of these. We do use Indeed also.
And Indeed too. Okay. How many of you have your own website for your practice or your hospital? Do most of you? Okay. And do you post jobs for? What's been your experience? Have you had positive traffic, good hires?
It just says what we're hiring
Mm-hmm.
and information about the job, but I think they still have to come in the hospitals.
They still have to come in and fill out the application.
Oh, okay. It
So I
doesn't
don't
have
know
a
that I
link
can
to
track,
online.
I guess we have to ask them where you hear from it at if we ask them.
Okay.
We probably should start.
Yeah. It would be interesting to find out. Yeah. Anyone else? What's been your experience, Christina?
We get a couple of applications. We have it linked to an application. I probably
Okay.
get 4 or 5 a month.
Oh,
off our
okay.
website. Some of the applications we get don't even fit
what we're looking for.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
right. So it's, they
We
people,
had a truck driver apply for a registered vet tech position.
oh dear.
So, yeah. So I'm just not sure sometimes what people think.
Well, was he currently employed? Because sometimes for unemployment, you have to fill out so many applications. And so people will just apply.
Show up for job
Yes.
interviews
Yeah, that's usually why. Yes.
either. I kind of figured that.
Yes. Great. Any other suggestions to share with the group? Great. So as you think about your recruitment strategy, in particular, think about those passive applicants. So those are your highly qualified individuals that are happily employed, doing a great job and not actively looking. And the individuals that I talk to who are passive, many of them have found jobs through LinkedIn and or a similar site where we reach out to them and let them know that this is an opportunity, looked at your background, looks like you're a great fit. And they'll say, I wasn't looking, I was recruited, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me. And then also think about your branding. I'm sure many of you are using your website to talk about some of the things that you're doing in the community so that people see how you're giving back and your connections. They've done studies on our millennial generation, and that connection back to the community is consistently one of the things that our new generation of registered vet techs are interested in. And so when we talk about that on Facebook, on our webpage, they know that they're joining an organization that gives back, and that's important to them. You might also share about individual accomplishments that your coworkers are enjoying, so that they can see how you're celebrating your employees. You have a culture of appreciation, that you're developing your team or encouraging your team to pursue their own career growth. The veterinary practice that I used when I lived in Wichita, Kansas, had a community board in their waiting room where people could post pictures if they'd lost an animal or if they had an animal for adoption. And that was a great way for your owners that are coming in to see that you care about the community and you're helping to make connections. And that's just another way to differentiate your practice from other practices, is that you're helping to connect pets with either their current owner or a future owner. What else are you doing to differentiate your practice from other practices or other hospitals in your communities? Go ahead.
One thing we do is we do a wine gala every summer.
And so the community looks forward to it. We get a lot of non-clients that come to us. Wine. Yeah, so we have wineries come and they're pouring. You
Oh,
pay admission
nice.
at the door. All the money goes to charities and any of it. And it's just fun. It's an open house for the clinic, so people can see everything.
Right.
And then we like to really stay on social media. Right now we're making a video. I have 2 students who have been accepted into vet school. So we like to share that, and anyone is into sports, when people are choosing the college they're going to go to, they do the signing day videos where they put on the hat. So I'm waiting on one of my students to choose what school he's going to, but we're producing a whole video like that. So we like to share that kind of stuff so that the community sees we're growing these people who are going off into the world and doing amazing things.
Oh, that's great. Great ideas. Thank you. I hadn't turned the wine before. That's really a creative way of connecting with the community. Thank you, Jennifer. Oh, you have?
One of our clinics is like a little downtown kind of area with like a bunch of stores and like a strip type of thing. So we got partnered with the other stores and called it Sip, Stroll, and Dark. So we have wine at each of the participating businesses.
Right.
People can just walk along with their dogs, and then we give money to charity.
Oh.
And put little signs out front.
Oh, those are great ideas. What else would you add? I'm the HR leader at Denver International Airport, and one of the ways that we support our pet community is Super Bowl Sunday. We have Puppy Bowl, and we bring in, about a dozen puppies from the shelter that are available for adoption. And, we have little, they can put on a jersey, and then whoever gets to the end, we think that's the person who's going to win the Super Bowl. Sometimes we do well, sometimes not so much. but it's a great way to bring awareness to the shelters that are available. A lot of the travelers that are coming through town stop by and play with the puppies, and every year they're usually adopted within the first hour that we host that. So we're trying to offer that more than once a year. And then we also have our canine therapy program for nervous travelers, that we have therapy dogs out on the concourses for people to hug, or kids that are anxious to play with, as part of our service to our travelers. So that's a couple of the ways that a non-practice is supporting our pet community. And you might check with your organizations and your communities to see if they would be willing to partner with you and supporting your owners as well. And so when we talk about branding, your reputation is what helps differentiate you as technicians are out interviewing. And think about, if you were out looking for a job, would you be excited to work for your practice? And do your employees consider you to be an employer of choice? And if not, what can you do to make some changes? And a lot of those changes are having a culture of appreciation, saying thank you, and recognizing, I call it catching people doing things right. As leaders, so often we're focused on, we need to correct the mistakes, we need to fix the problems. If we have an unhappy owner, we need to resolve that. And our employees do 20 great things every day, and we talk to them about the one mistake. And so I try to always make sure that I'm catching my employees doing things right, and I'm thanking them and I'll say, I saw the way you interacted with that owner. And she was really upset when she brought her dog in. And not only did you provide great care for the dog, but you were just very empathetic. You really took extra time to listen to her. When she left, she felt valued. Thank you for that. I know it was a few extra minutes out of your day. It may have pushed your schedule back. I really appreciate the extra attention. And just that genuine appreciation, so they know, here's exactly what I did that was right, so I can do that again. What are some other things that you're doing to differentiate your practices, or for your employees to feel appreciated? Because it usually doesn't cost anything. It's the recognition. Yes, Kelsey.
Those board that was started less than a year ago, and then people can just kind of promote positive peer pressure, so people see someone else doing something good, right? Like, hey, you did a great job with this, get on board, and then we take all of the cards off of our periodically, so we don't put a meal on, and then right now we're going to start a few times a year doing drawing, and however we draw out is, kids know about their balance at work, or get off, or anything like that.
Oh, how fun. Great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of I think you're really excited about the drawing. That's what you're thinking about.
Oh, is it?
Like an echo dot, like a little icon game.
Right.
But I think people just reading the board too.
Mm-hmm. How long do you keep the cards up?
I try to keep them up until the board is covered, and then we just take them out and start over.
Oh, how fun. Oh, that's great. And when did you start the drawings?
So that was my day we just had. So we hadn't done our first one.
Okay.
But we have quite a few cards for this summer, probably for the next month.
Oh, good. Good. Great idea. Thank you for sharing it. Any other suggestions or ideas that are working well that you want to share? Yes, Marissa.
We recently did our first Fill Your Balloons Day. So we had all the staff fill out a card that were all the things that fill their balloons that keep them happy.
Oh, nice.
And then on one of our staff meetings, we just spent an hour and a half doing as much of those things as we could. So we had some people wrote spending time with my husband. So we asked them to come and surprise them, and they like went out to breakfast. Some people went on hikes with their dogs. We were playing. We watched Pitch Perfect. We brought puppies from the Humane Society. A lot of people wrote cuddling puppies. Chocolate, popcorn, French fries, like just as many things from the list as we could.
Right.
And I mean, we had just done like a huge raise across the board, and we got way more thank yous for the Failure Women's Day than we did for the raises.
Oh.
Yeah, it was. It's a book. I don't remember. We had the author come present it to us, and so after her presentation, we had everyone fill out cards about what fills the votes. No, it's not. It's called. I don't remember. I can find out. But it was very successful and appreciated.
So what did you do with it after the event? Did you keep them in an area for
We still
people to
have some.
see?
We use them, to like when people have their 3-year anniversary, we go back and look at what they like so we can buy them a gift, That we definitely love those cards.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yes.
We always celebrate our employees' birthdays. So we'll bring in breakfast or lunch and kind of make them special and do the sign at the front so everybody walking in knows that it's their day and things like that.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yes.
We did the Tech Appreciation Week in October. I don't know if anybody else did that. Every October there's Tech Appreciation Week, but we make it Staff Appreciation Week, and every day we did a little something like that.
Can you share some examples of things that you did?
Ideas from Pinterest, actually. So we did, we got little extra gum packs and made little cards, and it says something about thank you for all that extra work you do, and a little gum pack in the middle. We did chapsticks that said "You're the balm," BALM, a little card with chapstick on it, and we just had like a basket of those items. And the last day, I got them all a car decal that has like a paw print with the heartbeat thing.
Oh,
so we just
nice.
did little things like every day of the week. Then we also had some of our reps came and did breakfast or lunches that week too.
Food's always popular, isn't it?
Food's always good.
Yes. Great ideas. Thank you for sharing them. A couple of other suggestions for turning your meetings into opportunities to show appreciation is at the start of meetings. I try a variety of things just to mix it up. Sometimes we'll start with shout outs. So it's what did someone do to help you since the last meeting that you really appreciated. So it's peer recognition. Nicholas really helped me with a dog that wouldn't lay still, and I appreciated you just stepping away from your duties to help me take care of this animal. And so yeah. And I have another one scheduled for next week, just so you know. But it's an opportunity to publicly thank our coworkers when we're so busy, and a lot of times we don't have a chance to do that. Another thing that I've implemented is to spend 5 minutes of appreciation. So turn to the person sitting next to you and spend 2 minutes just saying, Mariana, this is what I appreciate about you, and giving very sincere feedback. So you're always very thoughtful, even when you're busy. You take the time to be patient and kind with your coworkers and your owners. I've never seen you be short-tempered or snap at people. Thank you for that. It really makes it fun to work with you. And then the person says what they appreciate about you. It changes the tone of your meeting and the mood within the room, because we are busy people and we don't often have an opportunity to do that. Another thing that we have done is, and this takes usually about 15 minutes, is to have everyone go around and share what's one highlight from the last meeting, that they're a success story that they're really proud of. What's something that they're struggling with, and how can the rest of the team help them? And they just go around the table and we celebrate each other's successes, and then we hear how we can support each other and be more of a team. Because so often the people that we hire, they're used to being top performers, and so asking for help is really hard. And that's usually my role as the facilitators. They'll say, here's where I'm struggling, and then they stop. And I'll smile and say, how can we help you? Oh, okay. and it's a chance for your team members to interact and to support each other in a different way. And most of those examples take 5 to 15 minutes before a meeting. Yes, Karen?
That last one, do you limit it to just occurrences in the hospital or full life, like your
anything that they care to share. It's completely up to them. Yes, yeah, some of them, I had a lady who's, she's getting ready for the Boston Marathon, and so she shared a running story that meant a lot to her. Yes, Jennifer.
Is there a current theory on meetings? And that's why I have conversations. I like meetings and he doesn't. He's more accomplished in an email than in meetings.
Right.
And then he's like, picture the meeting is only 45 minutes. You know, like, is there a current theory on how many meetings, how much is too much? People start to zone out after a certain time. Is it okay to do emails instead of meetings? I like the face-to-face, but we're different.
Right. Great questions. And I would say everything is unique to your practice and your employees. So I joined a team that they were meeting an hour and a half every single week, which to me is just painful. And we had a lot of conversation around what's the value from the meetings? Where is it helpful for you? What information would you like to have communicated versus just sent out an email? And the challenge, Jennifer, is the meetings is an opportunity for people to ask questions and to engage with you about the topic, whereas an email is one-way communication, and it's harder for them to ask questions. It's more of a, here's what we're going to do. Come see me if you've got questions, but otherwise I expect you to get that done. So you might think about, is this, is your message something that you want to engage them in, or is it, here's an update, just let me know if you've got questions, but otherwise I assume we're okay. And I'd ask your employees, what parts of these meetings are most valuable for you? And think about what's most valuable for you as the manager and the leader, because there are some things I want to talk to them about in person versus send them an email and have them misinterpret it, and then I spend 3 hours reacting to something I could have had a 10-minute conversation on. Exactly, yes. And people, depending upon the day they're having, will add their own tone to it. So I don't know that there's a best practice. It's more of what works for your team and what's the message that you want to send. But you're right, we can have meeting exhaustion as well as email exhaustion. There's a lot of communication to it that we need to do. What have others tried that have worked well for you? Yes.
Well, I agree with you. I think when you send emails, it's definitely top down and it's not in any way for people to feel empowered or engaged. So we have monthly staff meetings. We have an agenda that goes up basically the day after our last one, and then people can kind of see the topics that others are wanting to talk about and have time to think about it. We have an agenda, things that we go over every time. We always go through a list of all the pets that have been euthanized so that people are on the same page about that. We do staff appreciations in a drawing. We talk about positive customer service stuff. And then in the interim, if there's something big that comes up, we'll email. But I absolutely think emails are personal, and our staff has told us that.
Right.
We just gloss over them. Even if we say, respond that you read this, it just feels like it's very much top down. There's some things that you just have to say.
Yes.
It's happening, or we're making a policy change for staff meetings. We also have monthly tech meetings, and our CSRs have a meeting. Management meetings, active meetings, so those are all monthly. I attend all of them, so I get meeting burnout. But the rest of the staff aren't going to all of those. So. But anyways, I think that our staff meeting, we set aside 2 hours, but we're usually about an hour, 15 minutes, hour and a half. And we bring lunch in, and we let whoever's birthday is that month gets to choose the meat where we get it from, and then dessert. Most of the other meetings are probably an hour.
Do you provide food for every single meeting?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's a great.
Yeah, we just have that budgeted in. So, yeah, we do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nothing extravagant, but it changes, and food is such a big thing. So,
Oh, that's great.
We have gone back and forth, but if not, like this seems, it's monthly meetings with each team. And I'm the liaison kind of between all of them to make sure there are topics that need to be cross-discussed or whatever.
Right.
That's been our experience, at least.
Great, thank you for sharing it, Heather. And to your point, if you have different audiences, that can be more productive. It's a little exhausting for you.
But it's okay. I mean, it allows those people to feel empowered. So when I attend like a tech meeting, I don't stay for the whole time because they don't want me there the whole time.
Right.
They want to have time to talk. But I'm there, like, do you have any issues you need me to know about, or how do we troubleshoot something? It's so interesting. Those meetings have there's a very different personality for those meetings. So
Okay.
Just with the different staff and stuff, but it definitely makes them feel like they're empowered to make decisions about their areas and feel like they're heard, and not just in the big staff meeting where some people are just quiet and don't participate.
Yes. Great ideas. Thank you. Another process that I found helpful is and I'm using this right now at the airport because things change so quickly. We have a 30-minute standing meeting every Monday. And so it's a chance just for quick updates. That's when we do our shout outs. So we start with 5 minutes of appreciation for what's happened over the week, and then I can give them updates. They each share updates from their team. We confirm calendars to make sure we're all on the same page, nobody's buried, and then we're done. And they never last longer than 30 minutes, and so there's a commitment that will be quick, will be efficient. Longer topics we say for one longer meeting each month as well. So you might try a blend too, just as you're experimenting. A couple things to remember. How many if you do background checks on social media, how many of you Google or check out applicants on Facebook? Yeah. Sometimes it depends. Yeah, just be aware that as you're Googling people and you're on their Facebook page, you don't know what you're going to see. And hopefully they have good common sense and that they haven't posted anything that you wouldn't want to see. But just be aware that there may be information that moves this applicant into a protected status that they weren't before. And so we need to be thoughtful of that. Okay. So if somebody shares that they have a particular religious belief, then you need to make sure that we're not hiring them because of that religious belief. Anything that might be protected in terms of age, religion, background, ethnic status. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Or, pardon me?
I'm sorry. I'm just a little confused by that.
Sure.
I realize you're not allowed to ask about that type of stuff, but if someone posts it on social media, why does that, I mean, you know it, you can't unknow it.
Right.
I mean, how are you supposed to, I guess, I don't know. I mean, it just seems to me, why does that change how you do it?
Well, it shouldn't. And so that's a good point, is that make sure that the new knowledge that you have doesn't change the perception that you had of them as an applicant. If they were your top applicant, would they suddenly be your bottom? Hopefully not. But just make sure that that any information that you receive that isn't job related, that doesn't cloud your perception of that applicant, because we all have filters.
I don't think anybody would do that consciously.
No, I don't either.
But I think subconsciously you can't, I don't know, it just has trouble registering with me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point, it's awareness. And so if you're aware of your filters, then you know.
If someone posts they're a big Yankees fan, I'm not, just throwing that out there. I know that's not protected. But
I say, unfortunately, that's not protected.
But I'm saying if that was protected.
Sure.
I think subconsciously it might lower my opinion of him or her.
Well, you might question their judgment.
No, but if it was something where it was protected.
Right. Yes.
So I'm okay on this.
Well, I think when it comes to Facebook, we just have to be very aware that you're maybe shocked at what you find, especially with the younger crowd that might not, have the adultness to kind of put a private security on their Facebook.
Right.
Just be aware that you may see pictures and stuff that you can't unsee. So
Yes.
you have to be aware, you might be scared of what you find, and then be able to, as a manager or a doctor, be in a
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Yes.
If you own a business, when you're hiring somebody, or you hire someone and you stumble across something that we could use the term can't unsee, it's a very broad term. If it's something that you don't agree with, this is a mission statement of your practice, or your business, whatever it may be, how do you handle that without getting in HR trouble? You know, where are the limits to keeping somebody or to not keep somebody on that staff?
Oh, okay. So I can give you an example. I work for a facility that's governed, security is governed by TSA, which is federal. We live in Colorado, and in the state of Colorado, marijuana is legal. At the federal level, it's not. So if I got on Facebook and they saw that the applicant is posting pictures of them smoking every weekend, they're probably not going to pass our security clearance and be an employee for us. So in our work environment, that's job related. And then as an employer, you would have to decide, is that information applicable to your practice as well? And are you following state or federal laws in your practice? Yeah. So would that be an example, or do you have another one that you're thinking of?
What ramifications could there be? Because they could post multiple things, and you can get very specific, I guess, if somebody wants to say, you didn't hire me just on my Facebook, and I posted that I am X, Y, or Z person, but you saw something quasi or truly illegal.
Right.
Or against the ethics of your business.
Mm-hmm.
That's a slippery slope, I'm sure.
Yes.
It's expensive.
Well, so you go back to the job duties, and the other candidate had more years of experience. We work with both large and small animals. Your background was only small animals. The applicant we hired was large and small. So the reason that you give for not selecting that person should be specific to the job or the type of clients that you serve, and I wouldn't even talk about what you saw. Yeah, and that keeps you, as you say, kind of legally safe and protected, because everything goes back to the job and the needs of the job. Yeah, you're welcome. Christine.
While we're talking about Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, you cannot fire someone for anything they posted on Facebook.
Actually,
Unless it's not your clip.
Right. So that's also an area where there's a lot of, I'd say, gray area in the courts. I think they're running about half are upholding those terminations and half are overturning, and it depends on what's been said. So if the employee says something that defames or harms the reputation of the clinic, and especially if it's not true, or they've twisted the truth to make to cause your business harm, those have a better chance of going through the courts if they're tested.
They have to mention the name though, right?
Typically they do, yes.
And if they say in their profile that they're an employee of,
Right.
employed at.
Right. Then they're speaking as an employee versus as a private citizen. So one of the challenges is the National Labor Relations Board. They came up with some guidelines. I believe it's Section 7 of the Board Act when social media came out that said all employees have the right to complain about their job, talk about their wages on social media as long as it's accurate and they're not defaming the company. Walmart, so if you want to Google Walmart social media policy, Walmart studied what's in the National Labor Relations Board verbiage. They had their attorneys look at it. They drafted a policy. They sent it to the National Labor Relations Board and said, give us feedback. And then they put it out on the website and said, this is our gift to all the other companies out there. We've paid all the money for the attorneys to create a policy that is compliant. And it's very specific, and it has some great guidelines for what employees can and cannot say and how companies can respond. So if you're thinking about a social media policy or you want to update yours, strongly encourage you to Google Walmart's because it's out on the website and available now.
It probably depends on the state too.
Mm-hmm.
Because in South Carolina, we're a right work state. fire somebody anytime for anything.
Yeah, Colorado's an at-will state as well. Yes. Yeah, and California has more employment laws than some of the other states, and so you're right. There's state laws and then there's federal laws that make a difference. But the social media is more, the National Labor Relations Board is federal, and so that's what Walmart was complying with. Yes, Kelsey.
You were mentioning how, you know, an employee can get on Facebook and talk about their wage and everything legally, and I know in Colorado, you can't tell people like you're not allowed to talk about your wages.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of like in your handbook or in your culture promote an environment where you do keep it private because it creates hostility in work environment? Private? How do you put that into the law? People need to say, don't talk about your wages.
Right. Yeah. So when I talk to the employees, I remind them this is confidential. It's between you and I and you and your family, and we would appreciate it if you would maintain the confidence here at the workplace. That this isn't something your coworkers need to know, and it's not going to benefit them or you for you to share that information. So we would appreciate you honoring the confidentiality of our relationship. They may still break it, but at least you've talked about the confidentiality and the mutual respect. Yeah. Has anyone else handled it another way?
What's the question?
Oh, so in Colorado, you can't tell employees that they can't talk about their comp, but you want a culture where people don't discuss compensation because that tends to create disharmony in the workplace. And I shared that one of the ways I handle that is compensation is a confidential discussion between the manager and the employee and their family, and that we hope that they'll maintain and respect that confidence and that trust because sharing the information isn't beneficial to the employee or the coworkers, and we appreciate their respecting that. They can still share it if they want to, but at least we've set the tone that our expectation and our hope is this will be a confidential, respectful discussion. Yeah. Any other questions before we move into resume tips? Okay. So these are some of the areas to think about. In particular, look at gaps in employment. Frequently on resumes, people will explain a gap or online employment. I just had an applicant that we hired who had an 8-month gap and explained that he was caring for an ill father. And so as soon as the manager saw that, they were great, let's bring him in and let's go ahead and interview this individual, an incredible employee. We're really excited. But make sure that when you see gaps, we ask about those. We've come out of a long recession, and sometimes really strong performers have just been in an economy that it was challenging for them to find employment, or they had family needs. And so it's always a good idea to ask in the screening interview. Do most of you do screening interviews before you bring people in, have a phone call and visit with them? Yeah, so that's a great thing to just include on your screening interview checklist. I wouldn't automatically rule them out, but I would inquire as to, can you tell me about that? Maybe they went back to school, but what happened that caused you to have that gap in employment? I always encourage applicants to put the results on their resume because it really will help to differentiate. So I know I cared for an average of 8 or 9 or 10 small animals in a day, or 4 large animals, or what was the volume of work that they're used to, and does the volume of work that they're used to doing match the workload at your practice, or is this going to be a stretch for them, or will they kind of encourage the rest of the team to step it up a little bit? Look for your education requirements. Any community leadership, community volunteering shows initiative and is something that you can discuss in the interview process. And the salary conversation is always controversial. So how many of you talk about salary in the phone screen, and how many of you wait until you're ready to extend the offer? How many are at the very beginning? Let's just get it out on the table and screen them out. Okay. And how many are, well, let's wait until the offer and then we'll screen it out? And what's everybody else doing? Somewhere in the middle. Okay, so when they're
So, not the first time we talked to you, you know, but, or just the screening part, but, you know, if there was a serious candidate, then go over, you know, what the job requirements are specifically and things like that. You know, special things like your dress codes, and, you know, all that kind of things. And then that's when we talk about job pays and pay scales and things.
Okay. So, Jolene, your sounds like after the second or the last interview when you're making the final decision whether or not you're going before you decide.
Between, you know, like a working interview or, you know, so you do your phone screening, just your general screening of your, however many applicants you get. And then the serious ones that I want to talk to, you know, and then kind of weed them out. If that's not a salary or an expectation that they have.
Right.
They'll tell you right then, and then I can go on with the ones
That are good fit. Great, great. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
We've been burned a few times because our interview process is long, it's 3 or 4 phases.
Right.
And so going through, and then at the end having the salary conversation, and they're like, oh, you know, like that absolutely doesn't work. And then it's like, great. So what we do now is our first phase is a group interview, it's usually like 25 people. The first thing we say is, if you're applying for this position, this is the range. This one, this is the range. Literally, feel free to walk out the door right now, and I mean, every once in a while, people leave. And it saves us. Saves time.
Exactly. Yeah. Then you know. Yeah. Yes, Jennifer.
About references as a part of the interview process?
Yes, we will. Yes. Well, it wants to stay on this one a little longer. There we go. Yes, so after the interview questions, we'll talk about references. In the back of your book, there's, I believe, it's called under the HR reference sheets tab. Thank you for letting me borrow your book. And these are all tools that you're welcome to take back and use in your practice. A listing of the tools that are in here are provided at the top. Then sample contents for your personnel files as well as your medical files is provided on the first page. And an overview of I-9s, what to do to correct errors and how you can do that in a way that's compliant with ICE's guidelines. The new I-9 form is provided in here, and this was just approved. It is effective until August 31st, 2019. So if you're using an old form, please replace it with the new form. It's a one-pager. There's an updated list of acceptable documents that were provided. We'll talk about compensation, and there's a couple of articles in here for your reference. And we'll talk about those after break. There's a listing of federal laws by the number of employees that you have. And so this is a helpful guide to know what federal laws are applicable to your practice or to your hospitals. And they're past the 2 articles on exemption guidelines. There you go. The next sheet is an Excel spreadsheet. It's a records retention schedule. And somebody asked, how long do we need to keep personnel files? So the type of employee information and how long you need to keep them by depending upon the record is all provided on this spreadsheet. So it's a good reference tool as to when you can begin to shred some of your old personnel files and your old employee records. Either one works. I've worked with several companies that we had paper files and we converted them to electronic. That's nice, especially in a large hospital if multiple people are trying to access them. If you're a smaller practice and having a HR information system is financially not an option right now, paper files are also great. I would keep them in a locked cabinet, and if it's fireproof, that's preferable. But it should at least be locked so that employees, owners, no one can have access to the records unless they have a key. Yes, Mercy.
Is it true that if you choose one, you have to be completely either electronic or physical paper? Because I ideally would like to have former employees then make those electronic because they're easier to store.
Right.
Current employees have physical paper charts. Is that, I feel like that's not okay, but.
I think that's okay because you're being consistent with current employees versus former employees. And current employees, you probably access their files on a more regular basis, so the paper works better for you. And then if you're consistently scanning them so that they're an electronic file and you don't have boxes of old files in a file room, that would be a effective way of maintaining those. Yeah. There's a disciplinary action notice, and then the next two pieces are some tips on your interview guide. So there's an interview guide, question guide that provides what questions you can and cannot ask, and what is the legal counterpart to those. And then the next page is a listing of interview questions, and that's what we'll use for our exercise today. So these are some sample questions that I've used in a variety of industries. The first one is reviewing the resume. The second one is a question that you can use to determine culture or role fit. The third one is to identify, are they a good fit for the role? The fourth one is a culture fit. We have questions regarding a couple for initiative, prioritization, teamwork, the knowledge that they have, how they handle stress, and how adaptable are they. So what I'd like for you to do in your table groups is just take a few minutes, read through those, and circle what are the ones that are appropriate for your practice or your hospital. Not all of them are going to be relevant for any one of your businesses. And then also share with each other what are questions that are really effective when you're screening applicants for your practice or your hospital. What's your go-to that you've gotten really good feedback that you want to share with others at your table? So let's take about 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll have each table share their best tip with the larger group. Sure. How are you? Hi. Yes.
We're supposed to pick questions based on what we think are the best questions?
For your practice, and then add to it what's been most effective for you. So all of us have questions that are our go-to, that we get really good feedback from our applicants, and they've helped us to really identify what's the best fit. So what would you add to that, and then share your interviewing tips with your table group, and then we'll have you share one tip with the larger group afterwards.
Got it.
Okay.
It is amazing when like people will change and you're just like, a lot of places are very desperate.
How are you doing?
Doing well.
Good.
Thank you.
In practice, when I was in practice,
First thing I learned was asking open-ended questions versus
You probably don't do a lot of interviewing, do you, in your role?
I actually do.
Oh, do
I'm in a
you?
leadership
Oh,
role,
okay.
So I do
Oh,
do
good.
quite a
Good.
bit, right?
Well, you might share what are some of your tips
Definitely.
and some of the things that have worked well for you.
They go on my show. It's more of a free flow interview, and my managers know what they can and can't ask. But I've been kicking around ideas of actually making like this
Yes, you can.
Our first question in our final interview, it's like a one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
is tell us about a recent vacation you went on. And it's meant to just be like an icebreaker and like kind of, but I've read that you have to be careful because, a lot of times they'll say, oh, I went with my husband and kids, or I went with my boyfriend. And it kind of does give you insight into what their family life is.
Oh.
So I've always been a little weary of that question.
Sure. Most applicants work their family into their questions, so I don't worry about that a whole lot. Because
information, that's okay.
right, yes, because you're not asking. Right, you're not asking, and I found most applicants will just share a story about their kids or their spouse or their dog, and what they volunteer is that's their
As long as
choice.
you can prove that you didn't not offer them a job because of something you learned from
Right,
that question.
right. So, I've had people, especially when I was right out of college, say, "Oh, well, I noticed from your hand you're recently married. Are you planning on having children soon?" Now, you can't say that. Now, if I volunteer, oh, by the way, I'm 3 months pregnant, then that's my decision. And I had a bank hire me when I was 6 months pregnant. So, I didn't have to say anything. I was huge. and I said, you realize I'm going to need a break here in about 3 months. So, yeah, that's fine. You can take that. we expect it. We're not blind. So if they share, because they could also pick a vacation that they took with their parents or a friend, or it's a broad enough question that right.
You can ask that, right? Like, what are your hobbies, or what do you like to do?
Right. Yes.
Again, just to kind of have more of a conversation than like.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Or what's on your top on your bucket list, or what's your dream for this year? Or did you make a New Year's resolution? Yeah. They can be pretty broad and general, but yeah, you get to know the person a little bit. Right. Yes. Yeah. Great, you're welcome.
The physical exam, the normal physical exam.
I always just wondered, well, it seems to me and then I'm like, oh, wait. We don't make that much here. Here's something like that's paid that much here.
Okay, why don't we come back together as a large group, please? Let's come back together as a large group, please. And we'll start with this table. Would you be willing to share what was the best tip or question that you heard for your groups? If everybody would give this table the floor, that would be great. We're having some wonderful conversations. This table has the floor. So what would you share with the larger team about your experience.
One of our questions that we really like is, what type of people do you get along with best?
Ah, okay.
I'm sorry, I can't repeat that, sorry.
What type of people do you get along with best? Because it gives them the opportunity to explain to you who they get along with, as opposed to you asking them, do you get along with mean people, you know?
Right.
Which is what I was doing.
Oh.
So thank you.
Great. Good tip. Thank you. This table, what was your best interviewing tip?
Kind of, as a group, look at what you can't ask and notice that what you can't ask is usually broad, kind of like you did open-ended.
Right.
I mean, that's our tip, so keep it open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
Because that way they speak
Right.
without asking.
Exactly.
Don't take a medical history, let them tell you. Don't put thoughts in their head.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, tell me about your favorite job. Why did you enjoy it? What made that job fun for you? What makes you want to reach over and hit the snooze button? And is that 90% of your job? Well, it's good to know that. Yeah, but you're right. Keep it broad, open-ended, and encourage them to talk. Great tips. How about this table? What was your best tip?
Oh, I don't think we got our best tip for
Interviewing.
interviewing.
Yes.
I don't know. I was going through these and kind of selecting like some that I could, even with current employees, ferret out some problems that they're having with some of the questions, as well as those. But I think, some of the culture describe the environments that they're most productive, or what didn't they like about their last culture jobs. I think they're very important.
Right.
As well as maybe, for us, because we're a very fast-paced clinic, large and small, there's a lot of, we're here, we're not, where'd the doctor go? So, if their adaptability is there, it's really important for us.
Yes. So one question you might ask is, do you appreciate an established process that gives you consistent results, or do you prefer rapid change? And that would let you know if they'll be energized by your work environment or frustrated by it. Because it sounds like you're pretty quick and there's a lot of change. And some people thrive on that and others are, no, I've got my way of doing it and I like it and don't mess with me. And which is great, but they may be a better fit for someone else. Yeah, great examples. Thank you. How about this table?
So we talked about kind of questions that I currently ask, which some of them kind of fit into here, but my first three questions are always, first question is, how do you feel about helping people you don't know?
Oh, great.
Second question is, what would you do if someone needed your help? And then my third question is, tell me about a time when you did help someone. And we just kind of, they're open-ended questions. They talk a lot when they're telling me those things.
Right.
And it does kind of throw people for a loop when I first ask the question.
I can imagine. And you asked them, tell me about a time you didn't help someone?
You did.
Oh, you did? I thought you asked when you chose not to help someone. I thought, oh, that's a fascinating question. I've never heard that one before. Great examples. Thank you, Kelly. How about the back table?
One question that we ask is, tell us one of your greatest accomplishments. And that lays with work or personal or whatnot, so you can kind of feel if they're very prideful or have a leadership role or pretty humble, and you can kind of gauge them that way.
Great. So you get them talking, relaxed, saying positive things. That's a great way to put applicants at ease so that they'll share. Great. Thank you, Amy. How about this table?
So we said basically open-ended. I asked pretty much just tell me about yourself. Start, finish, and just see where we go. Everybody goes down that way.
Kristen, I read an article recently that was published by a university that stated that they have a policy in place that anyone what motivates you most? A, money, B, recognition, or C, being number one.
Right.
Independent of one of your answers, they gave reasons why you can rule that person out, or what they prefer to be.
So what was their preference?
Recognition. It all goes hand in hand, essentially, right? Because if you're being recognized, obviously you're doing something good, which can get you to the top, which can increase your pay.
Right.
And you don't like to see people that just say pay.
Yeah, that's very short term.
Number one, generally speaking, is going to be the person who will do these things just to get to the top. They're not necessarily going to get somewhere and want to work together to where we're all excited.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Table, how about this table?
I don't do the interviewing, but Mercy shared one of her questions that I thought was really brilliant.
Oh, good.
Which was,
Thank you,
tell us something you tried and were unable to accomplish.
Okay.
Which I think resonated with all of us.
You get people to say, I can't think of anything.
Right. And well, it tells you about persistence too. Yeah. Did you try and keep working?
Like the icebreaker kind of questions, too, like, where's your last vacation? Like you had mentioned what's on your bucket list. I think that's great.
Right. Yeah.
That's really universal.
Yeah, something that they're dreaming about. Yeah. Great. Thank you. And our table in the back.
I'm in industry now, so I don't currently interview candidates, but when I was in practice, I did. It was part of my role, and I was a huge fan of behavior-based interview questions because I really feel like we can pull out traits from those individuals to see if they are good fits for your practice. And when we talked about two big questions, one for the front desk staff would be, tell me about a time that you dealt with an upset client and how you alleviated that and they left happy.
Okay, good.
And then the other one was, tell me about a time that you had conflict with either your boss or another associate and how you handled that situation.
Great, great. Yes, because disagreements are going to happen in every organization, so it's good to know how they normally respond to those and handle them in a productive way. Yeah. Here's some potential behaviors to look for. One of the questions that I really like is, and I preface it with, we all make mistakes, including myself. If we're not making growing, we're not making mistakes. So tell me about a time when you acknowledge that you made a mistake. And what did you learn from that experience? And I find I get more candid responses to that question than I do, what's a development opportunity or where are you struggling? People don't like to admit that they have weaknesses, but we've all made mistakes. That's part of being human. But the goal is, what did they learn from it? And what did they learn from it? And did they change their behavior going forward? I usually ask a couple of questions around initiative. So are they going to go above and beyond what's asked of them if they're done with their day? Are they going to look to see if they can help their coworkers? Or are they going to go grab a cup of coffee and go, well, too bad those other folks aren't done. And what kind of initiative and team building will you see within your practice? And their ability to multitask and prioritize. Ask them for an example of a time that they've done that. I ask a lot of open-ended questions about experience. Here's some examples of that. And then behavior-based questions, you can use the STAR model to create your own. So you can either give them, I usually give them a situation, tell me about a time when you did this. What needed, from your assessment, what needed to be done or resolved? What action did you take and what result did you get from that situation? And that's a really easy, quick format to create your own behavior-based questions. We've talked about some of the legal landmines to avoid. Are there any you have questions about that you want to discuss a little bit further? We've talked a little bit about some of these when we were discussing social media. Yes, please, Jessica.
Yeah, I do. For my practice, we have a lot of long-term employees.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like for our clientele, they're used to seeing the same faces. It's very family. They know everybody. So it's important to me to hire someone, because we don't have a lot of turnover, who has a long-term view to be with us and not just, we're just like a pass-by job. So I do ask them, where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years? Do you have aspirations, things of that nature?
Sure.
I'm really asking, are you looking to stay here for a while? Are you trying to leave in 2 years?
Right.
So, I mean, is there a specific way I'm supposed to ask it?
No, what you're doing is fine.
Okay.
So, what's your career plans? What's your dream for your future? What do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? Those are all very valid and appropriate questions. And regardless of any of these, the applicant can answer them honestly, and you're not in any protected classes by asking that, because you're talking about their career path and their career goals to see is that in alignment with your practice. Yeah, great question. Yes, Andy?
So,
Sure.
So you asked about the career plan, you might ask them about, their life plans.
You'd have to identify how their life plan meets the job requirements. So how is that applicable to the job?
so you can't say something like, well, describe for me your life in 10 years. You can't.
I wouldn't. I would keep it focused on describe your career in the next 5 years or 10 years. Where do you see yourself going professionally, so that you're keeping the questions and the interview focused on the job and the company that you're interviewing for.
And could you elaborate on what GINA is?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, so GINA is the newest addition to Title VII. It's the Genetics Information Non-Discrimination Act. And there were some companies that, as part of their pre-employment medical screen, would screen for cancer, diabetes, ask questions about a family history of stroke. And the goal was to keep their medical their medical insurance down. Keep that, you're right, you're going, it's so wrong. That's why it's now a law. And so their intent was to control their medical insurance costs, but that was ruled as discriminatory and inappropriate in 2009, so it was added, yes.
Being that we're in a field which requires physical, lifting and such.
Right.
There's a question.
There's a really good one. Can you lift 50 pounds?
Right.
So we can ask specifically,
Yes.
can you lift, or can you?
Exactly.
Yes.
Because as we all know, there's a lot of back issues in
Right.
the field. And to have somebody who has already had, disc surgery, can't ask them if they've already had disc surgery.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
But do we ask for like a doctor, like if they say they can't, would we then ask for like a doctor release? Well then, what does your doctor say you can lift? You know what I mean? Like if we follow up with
What are you able to lift?
but I can't, right.
Yeah, what's legal there?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now you're shifting. So the bona fide occupational qualification is what you're speaking to, Jennifer. And if it's job related, so if they're normally lifting a 35-pound animal, it's okay to say this position will require lifting of 35 pounds. It requires bending, stretching. You may have to squat down and pick up an animal and set them on the examination table. Is this a job duty you can perform with or without accommodations? And that's the important piece, is that we're required through the Americans with Disabilities Act to provide what's called reasonable accommodations. That term is really loosely defined, and that's because it's specific to the company. So what's a reasonable accommodation for a small practice is completely different than what's a reasonable accommodation for Amazon. Amazon has a lot more resources. They can provide a greater array of accommodations than a private practice can. No, it's intentionally not defined. It's just reasonable accommodation based on your business. Yeah. No. And so you ask, can you do the job with or without reasonable accommodations? If they say yes, we continue the interview process. If you have them complete a pre-employment medical exam, I would make sure that the person providing the medical exam is double checking the lifting, the squatting, the bending over and lifting up, that they're actually testing them, because they're a separate medical facility, they're licensed to do that, and then they would let you know if this person is qualified to do the job or not. And that eliminates the risk from your perspective. Yeah, and if they do have accommodations, you can ask if they could provide the accommodations after you extend the offer. You can't do it before you extend the offer, but you can extend the offer contingent upon a background check if you do drug testing, and them sharing the accommodations to make sure that you're able to meet those. And then you'll be able to look at them and see, you know, can my practice accommodate this or not? If it's just that I need a second person to help me lift a large animal, well, that happens once or twice a week. We could probably accommodate that. Other requests we may not be able to. So it's a case-by-case basis. Yes?
Would they have been defined by a medical doctor or by a previous employer coming to you?
Usually, right.
Okay.
Yeah, or at the time of the surgery, the doctor would provide written accommodations that they can take to their current and future employer. But it's important that the offer is extended before you ask for the accommodations. Background check.
Able to meet these accommodations?
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Contingent upon, you know, background checks, drug testing if your practice does that, and our ability to meet your accommodations. Yeah.
Is the wording, are you able to meet the minimum job requirements? Is that
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with or without accommodations. Right. It's helpful, yes. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So these are just some best practices, which I believe it sounds like all of you do. Just a good reminder is, as interviewers, we should talk 20% of the time, and our applicants should talk 80% of the time. And that tends to be the one thing interviewers kind of struggle with. These are some biases just to be aware of. So first impression, if you have, whether it's positive or negative, making sure that you're present, you're listening to the answers to your questions, and so that the assessment that you do of the candidate is based on the interview information, but keeping in mind, you know, the impression that they gave, and that's going to potentially be the first impression for your owners as well. A negative emphasis is if they say one thing wrong in the interview and that overshadows every other comment. Nonverbal bias, have you ever had an applicant that clicked their pen during the entire interview? And yeah. So, you know, you can always politely ask them to stop and then continue on with the interview, but make sure that that's not overshadowing, that if they are distracting, we ask them to please quit. Contrast effect, wait until after you've completed your interviews to compare applicants. Sometimes it's hard in the interview process, they're answering a question, oh, you're better than that other one, but I like her answer better. It's your time to just focus on them, and then we do our comparisons after the interview is over. I think we talked earlier about the similar to me, making sure that we have diversity of thought in our practices, and Horn and Halo is they say one thing right or one thing wrong, and that overshadows the rest of the interview. Some of the challenges of interviewing, so if you have someone who can't think of an answer, I will ask the question 3 times. So I'll say, that's all right, we'll go on. I'll come back to it one more time. I might rephrase it slightly to help jog their memory. If they haven't answered it by the 3rd time, I'm done, and that's a non-answer. Some people are just either you get it or you don't, which is a fine approach as well. It's just whatever is your personal style. But I know I've been in situations where my mind just has gone blank, so I like to give people at least one more opportunity to answer the question before I decide it's a non-answer. Reserved candidates tend to they don't give enough information, so make sure that you ask follow-up questions. I've had interviewers ask, is it okay if I do that? Absolutely. Say, tell me a little bit more about that, Gail. That sounds like a really interesting situation. I'd love to hear what was the outcome of that? How did that situation work out for you? And encourage them to keep talking. I've also had fabulous applicants who were great communicators. They told me fabulous stories, and they never once answered a single question that I asked them. So that's one that you get so caught up in the stories that after they leave, you go, wait a minute, that's not what I asked. That's probably not the right person for you. There are some people who are just fabulous interviewers, and make sure you don't get caught up in the story and you stay true to your interview questions and what it is that you're looking for your job. Any other challenging applicants that you want to discuss? Some tips for closing the interview. This is an opportunity to talk about why your practice or your hospital is different and better and the employer of choice. So why should you work here? Tell them about our culture. Tell them about some of the fun things we do. Tell them about how you engage in the community, your wine tasting events, your appreciation events. What makes us unique? Make sure, I always ask what questions they have, and I look to see, have they gotten on our website? Did they do their homework? Do they know about our practice and our hospital? Are they showing initiative to find out about us before they show up? Or if they go, no, I think I'm good, thanks. Well, okay. How much initiative are you going to show when you get to the workplace? And then let them know what's the next step. You'll hear back from us within a week, 2 weeks. We're just starting the interview process, but manage their expectations. That will help you to avoid a lot of calls and emails saying, where are you at? What's going on? Tell me about it. And so if you manage their expectations up front and thank them for that. And then after you've finished your interviews, that's when it's a great time to evaluate all the candidates. If there's other people that have interviewed them, I like to just get in a room and talk through candidates together, because people will perceive applicants differently, they'll behave differently, and it's helpful to see how they've interacted with other people on the panel. I group into hire, don't hire recommendations. Then you could do assessment tools. I know some practices have people job shadow so that they can see if this is a good fit or not. And that's the time to do your reference checks, your background checks, and if you do any pre-employment drug screening. And in that tab in the back, the last two handouts, there's a list of sample questions for reference checking and also a sample offer letter that you're welcome to use in your practices. Make sure that we don't form a contract with the employee by our verbiage, that we're extending an offer. We look forward to having you on the team, but that we're not promising that, we look forward to working together for the next 10 years. This is going to be great. Well, and then you're starting to get into a employment contract with them. Remind them to bring their documentation for the I-9 form that has to be done within the first 3 days, and let them know when you need a response. Usually people respond pretty quickly, but I give them a couple of days and let them know within usually 3 days. Please respond back by this date if you're accepting our job offer. Most of my offers I do verbally by phone. Some positions I'll follow up with a letter, so that's something you can scan and send as a follow-up after you've had the verbal offer. Any other questions? Yes?
When you're doing reference checks, and I think this is one of our questions.
So as long as your references are factually accurate and it's related to the job, you're fine. Where people run into problems is when that employee left and they burned their bridge with me and I am so angry. Let me tell you about them. And you can't trust them. They'll stab you in the back and you share your frustration. So they may have had that experience with you, but they may be completely fine with someone else. So we stick to job duties, how they performed their job. Did they show up to work on time? Were they chronically late? We did a...
You can tell them that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's job related and it's factually accurate. We had a discipline meeting with an employee for tardiness and he was 15 minutes late to the meeting. That was Thursday. I thought, well, you're consistent. You got to give you points for that, I guess. But so you can share that. You can share dates of employment, job duties, and if they were your star performer, let them know. These were some things they did that was above and beyond what I expected. Yeah, but as long as you're factually accurate, you're fine. Yes?
State by state or federal?
That's pretty much federal at this point, yeah. You might look to see, there was concern, oh gosh, it's been probably 10, 15 years ago, and there were some lawsuits around reference checking, which made people nervous, but it was because people were, yeah. Right, yeah, and a lot of companies just say, don't say anything, let's just be safe. But again, as long as you're factually accurate, what caused the lawsuits is people that were malicious and were preventing other people from finding employment. What I'd encourage you to do is be consistent. So if you've got employees that are gone, when they turned in their notice, you closed your door and went, yes, and you're only going to give dates of hire, title, and maybe confirm salary, then I would be consistent across your practice and do that with everyone. I can tell you as a longtime HR person, I never call HR because they'll only give me dates, title. I always call the supervisor because they'll usually tell me more. And, but as long as it's factually accurate and it's job related, you should be fine. But how much you share is up to you. But be consistent. Yeah. MJ.
We recently had an interesting situation where we had to terminate somebody for theft of controlled substances, and he was actually patriated, and we turned him over to the police. And they were a long-time employee, good technician, and we're actually trying to seek employment in the industry still, and we're consulting with their HR professional and stuff like that. There's actually liability concerns that if you don't disclose that information.
All right. Yes. So with licensure and some of those requirements, it's you've got a different situation there. Right. Yeah. It'll show up in the background check.
Right now, actually on Tuesday, I get to go to court. This issue. And once this person gets charged with, is convicted of felony, she will not be able to work in veterinary hospitals or medical facilities that have controlled drugs.
Exactly.
Which is the state's choice.
Yeah. And but you're right. It needs to be a conviction rather than an arrest. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did you say in references you can confirm salary?
Some companies will, some will not. You can always ask. Yeah. But each company has a slightly different practice on that.
But asking is not
not a problem. Yeah.
We had an employee that we let go for theft. Her attorney called and was very concerned, said she was concerned when she called up other jobs, calling up for references. I told him I would only say that she worked there and the dates.
Right. Yeah.
And because I didn't think we didn't prosecute her.
Right. Yes. If you didn't charge her, then I wouldn't say anything. I would just confirm, here's her position, dates of hire, and that's all our practice provides.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
question that is if kind of the drug, if that individual steals something, can that employer come after you for not disclosing that?
Well, you didn't charge her, so typically not. I had an employee that we terminated for theft. She was embezzling. We decided not to prosecute. And then I found out she embezzled from her next 3 employers. None of them ever called me for a reference, so I was never put in that position. But she didn't learn from her mistakes either, and eventually she moved to another state because the word got around in the community. She had stolen from enough people. So eventually their reputation kind of takes care of itself. Yeah, you hope people learn, but they don't always. Yeah. Do you guys need a 5-minute break? And we'll jump into comp? Okay. And if you want to, why don't you grab some lunch and you can eat while we talk about money. That's always a fun thing to do. Why don't we, let's continue. There's 3 questions that I noticed on the selection that we didn't cover, so I'd like to talk about those. Someone asked if it's better to hire someone with experience and bad habits or inexperience and train them. And that is a great dilemma. What I look for is, what does the rest of the team look like? And can you afford the time to train an inexperienced person? And if so, you're right. A lot of times, hiring someone right out of the veterinary tech school, training them, forming your own habits is easier than retraining an experienced person. It may take a little longer to ramp up and to onboard them. It's usually about 6 months. So if you've got that time, that's always a good investment. Then look at how ingrained and how open to change is your experienced candidate. This is how I've done it. My way's right. Ask questions about, tell me about a time when you and a coworker had different approaches to deal or to resolve a patient situation, and you felt your way was right. How did you handle that? So are they open to others' ideas, feedback? Is it, nope, it's my way or the highway? And that'll let you know, can you change these bad habits, or are they pretty ingrained? And if they're really ingrained, will they fit into your practice, or are they going to be disruptive? And I would look at that on a case-by-case situation, because I've done both, and you probably have too. And it really depends on how flexible that person is and your ability to train. Yeah. What other experiences have you had, or does that answer the question? Okay. Another one was, how do we discuss comp with a DVM who isn't proficient in all the basic skills? So what I would do is, and I created a development plan for a new hire and let the DVM know, here's the strengths that we see for you coming into the practice. This is a skill set that's important to our practice that you don't have yet. Here's a development plan to help you gain that skill. Here's how outside resources, if you have internal resources, so they job shadow someone. Do they need to take another class? But put together a development plan for them and let them know that once they complete that development plan, we'll take another look at your compensation. But for right now, we're going to bring you in at the lower end of the range because we're investing a lot into your development, and we'll reassess comp as soon as you've successfully completed the development plan. Do you have any other suggestions or things that you've tried? Yes.
If you create that development plan, what kind of timeline would you put with that as well?
It depends on the how long it would normally take a vet to learn those skills. So if on average it's 3 months, I put together a 3-month plan. You can always extend it. What I look for is, are they continuing to consistently and steadily improve, or have they stagnated? Okay. And if they improved for the first 3 weeks and then they stopped, well, is extending it going to provide you with any additional information? Or do we keep them at their current pay and just let them know, you're going to remain at this salary until you choose to learn this skill, and when you do, we'll revisit it. But I would keep the pay at the low end of the range as an incentive for them to learn the skills and to follow up on the plan. Most people, when money's involved, are pretty motivated to earn the salary that they're hoping for. Yes, Jennifer.
The topic of DVM compensation also, we work on a ProSal, our associates work on ProSal, they have their base.
Okay.
They get production, they meet that and they get their production as a bonus every month. So I have some doctors who are not living up to, I guess I should say, medical record standards. They are taking way too long to complete their medical notes. And I talked to them at length about doing that. Can I put in my next contracts with them, if they do not fulfill such and such and such, I will withhold their production? Is that okay for you to do that?
You have to be careful about withholding pay because with the Fair Labor Standards Act, which we're going to talk about next, if they perform the work, you need to pay them. But paying them at a lower rate that's within the appropriate range or market for that position, you can establish a lower range. But typically, you can't withhold
They
pay.
always get their base salary.
Right.
No matter what.
Right.
It would be that their production is paid as a bonus. It would be that bonus that they would not get paid if they are not fulfilling their job duties.
Great clarifying question. So if they've earned the bonus, you need to pay it.
Even if they're not.
But can you make that tied to?
They're to their performance. It should be tied to their performance. It's not?
But it's their production, it's their money, it's monetary. It's their production base.
Okay.
Can you,
So you might want to rewrite the bonus program, but if they've earned it based on the way your plan is written, it's going to be really hard for you to withhold that.
I have heard of some people, and this is just through hearsay, some hospitals having the doctors pay the difference if they do not make their production in a month. So people are
That's also-
doing things with production.
Right.
And it's salary based, I mean, and it's in the contract. And it's in the contract that if you don't make your production this month, you're gonna pay me the difference.
Wow. I was going to say, I'd have an employment attorney look at that. It's not a practice I'm familiar with.
It's happening a lot apparently because several of the interviewees that I've had have asked me if I don't make my production, do I have to pay it back?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Locally, but it was Mark Opperman's approach.
Okay.
Mark Opperman's approach formally.
Right.
He's a prominent consultant. And you get paid at the end of the year.
Some people do production at the end of the year.
Okay.
My question in my interview is, how long would I last here? You weren't going to pay me at the end of the year.
Right.
It turned into a good job, but it was, and I took the risk and expected to outperform it. And I was lucky that happened, but I was also very pleased. But yeah, my question was, I didn't want to spend legal bills, check, I just went for the risk. But
It sounds risky to me. My practice has always been, and what the employment attorneys have always told me is, if they've earned it, you have to pay it. And if you can change your bonus plan, and we'll talk about that, that you can, and I actually encourage you to link the bonus to either performance or the performance of the practice. And if the employee doesn't meet the performance goals or the practice doesn't meet its performance goals, then you don't pay the bonus. But it's very clearly stated in the bonus plan. I haven't heard of any situations where the practice met their plan, the employee met their plan, and they weren't paid.
the formula is very simple. It's your first paycheck is a base,
Mm-hmm.
your base salary.
Right.
It's 24 pay period type pay.
Right.
The first check is part of that. The second check is that is your production, say 22% of your gross.
Okay.
Minus your base. And if
Oh,
you're-
so you need to re-earn your base.
If you're making less than your base, that second paycheck could be made.
That's what I mean. You have to.
Oh,
And
okay.
you will be compensated at the end of the year if you're consistently negative.
Right. So the plan document should include, if you don't re-earn your base, because salespeople usually have a similar, it's base plus commission, and they don't get commission until they've re-earned their base. And then if they don't re-earn their base, then it depends on the document. Some plan documents will pay just the base, but then you deduct even more from the next month. And if you haven't earned your bonus in 2 months, then you're put on a performance plan and they begin working on exiting you out.
Yeah, it is, you can go negative, but it's very clearly
We don't.
Yeah, I don't
penalize
know
them
that I've
for
had,
going- we
right.
don't penalize for going negative. But
Right.
when I say production, it's commission.
Right,
So I want
yeah,
to-
that's what I say, it sounds like it's a commission
It is a
program.
commission, it's 25% of their services. and
They call it
5%.
bonus check, but it's really,
It's personal.
it's pro style, it's
We
different.
do it
Right.
25 times, and we
Yeah.
calculate it once a month, and they get paid on the second.
Yeah, if you're guaranteeing them that monthly salary, typically you pay that, but you can raise the expectations for next month's performance before they get production. You can, but I would add that to the plan document so it's really clear. Yeah. Interesting.
I have a question. 'Cause
Yes.
I guess you were on it, but I wasn't. But my question was, so I've got an undergrad, you know, they asked for wants so much money. And I don't, we don't do the pro salary and stuff, I think. First of all, undergrad couldn't, realistically, they're not going to make
Right.
what they need to make, without taking money, what I do. So the problem is she's really good at most things, and analytics, sales, and marketing, and she's getting better at her time communicating and such that. But surgeries, she's not doing surgery. And I guess, you know, the problem is you know, our view is that I'm really excited in the future.
Right.
That's the one time everybody thinks they might get punished. The only time you can really see matter of people are those surgeries. And when she's taking our things or go out to else, you know, obviously somebody can step in and do it.
Right.
So there's no pressure for her to be better.
Ah.
It's like for her own little want.
Right.
She gets taken sitting out regardless. And then she's taking emergencies because she's not confident surgery. Obviously, the C-section or something like that. You know, so I guess the conversation is going to be next year she can expect more because, you know, a raise. But she still has skills that she's kind of trying to do more.
Right.
I would give her.
Well, and I would encourage you not to give her a raise because she's not doing her job. So this is a performance issue, and I would start documenting the performance and the coaching and the training that you've provided to her and clearly communicating your expectations. And if you want, I can send you a sample performance improvement plan that you can use to it's a coaching tool. It's also could become a disciplinary tool, but it identifies here's the situation, this is the gap, and so right now it's taking you an hour to do a 15-minute procedure, which is leaving the animal under anesthesia much longer than the animal should be. These are my expectations. Here's the training we've provided for you, and I need to see immediate improvement, or we'll continue the disciplinary process. Now, that's a performance issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to give me your card, I'd be happy to send you a template you could use to have that conversation with her. But if you've been working with her for a couple of months and she's not improving, it's time to be a little more formal.
Yeah, I wasn't real sure, you know, because the staff will work to the speed that the doctor wants. So if you get a
Right.
doctor that's taking their time and
Right.
happy to wait in between surgeries, but they know when I'm the one doing surgeries, I can go through 8 surgeries in 2.5 hours. They've got to have an animal ready
Right.
to go from table to table. But then I'll walk in with 4 surgeries, and it's now 11:30. People are past their lunch, so they know they're on overtime. And then they'll look at me and say, "Can you do this last surgery?" You know,
Right.
because they're so far behind. But it's mostly not just their performance issue, but I think there's a performance issue in my hospital techs, my surgery techs, that they're not keeping her going. They're going to her speed instead of them trying
Right.
to make her go fast.
Yeah. But it sounds like the surgeon may be the one regulating the pace, so I would talk to the surgeon. Yeah, because the techs will follow the surgeon's lead. Yeah. Yeah. And then Kristen asked a really interesting question. We talked about applicants who do a great job of selling themselves and then they show up and you're, oh, surprised. We also have applicants who are really great employees but have a hard time selling themselves. And some tips for drawing those folks out is to, and I was sharing with her, I interviewed a woman who hadn't worked in 25 years and was returning back to the workforce. And every question I asked her, she'd look at me and go, I don't know. I haven't worked in 25 years. I don't have an answer for you. And so I'd say, well, you said you did some volunteer work at your church. Tell me about that. How did you work with volunteers and to motivate them? Tell me about a situation where you and a volunteer. And so I would reframe the questions. And I worked harder on that interview than probably most because I kept trying to bridge for her. Here's some of your experience as a volunteer at your kid's school, at your church. And she ended up being one of my best employees. She was fabulous. And so if you've got someone who you can tell the self-confidence isn't there, helping them to bridge, here's other ways that you demonstrated these skills outside of the work setting. Give me an example that would apply to this question in a non-traditional environment. That's another way to find some really great candidates and help them. Did you have any additional tips that you'd like to share?
Well, that was my question. Was anyone doing any little icebreakers or anything at the beginning of the interview just to make people feel relaxed and confident and can open up? Because I fear, we get referrals all the time about, oh, this is an amazing employee, and then they come in for an interview and they're like, that was the worst interview ever. But some people just don't interview well due to nerves. So the question is, does anyone do anything that helps break the ice?
We do a hospital first. Okay, so they come in and we tour them around and just kind of like, I don't know, it's like you're not just like sitting down with a friend, girl around. We walk them around and show them everything first.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. Yes.
Group-oriented, collaborative culture, and we typically interview new candidates together.
Yeah.
Usually, like, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 people in our interview. Is there? I don't know. I feel like that might encourage somebody to be a little bit less open or just more intimidated. Is there a, does it really just depend on individual organization, or is there a matching number, or?
Well, I can share with you because I have a similar team that they all want input, all 7 of them, which can be daunting. So I conduct the screening interview and then narrow it down to my top 2 candidates. And at that point, they're both well qualified. It's who's the best fit. And I have them over for lunch or breakfast. And we sit around a coffee table or a conference room table and eat breakfast or lunch. And it's a chance to just informally visit. I talk to my team about what kinds of questions are you going to ask to make sure we have a blend of some work-related questions, but also some getting to know you questions. So they ask things like, so, I'm a runner. What do you like to do after work? And just to see if they have things in common that they want to talk about. And then I watch the body language and how they connect with one another and ask for their input, but ultimately I make the decision. And that approach has worked well for me. I keep it pretty casual. Yeah. Great. Yeah. And then Bill brought up a great point over break is when we were talking about reference checking, and if any information that you share that it should be factually accurate, it's also helpful if it's something you've already documented. So I gave the example of being tardy, and hopefully before you share that as a reference, you've already documented the tardiness, you've had conversations with the employee, and we're not sharing anything with an employer that we haven't already had documented conversations with the employee. So great. Okay, so let's talk about compensation. The Fair Labor Standards Act is a federal law, and it establishes minimum wage, the exemption guidelines, which I have in your handout, and the minimum wage. This is one of the few laws where state overshadows federal. Usually federal overshadows state. So I looked up Colorado just increased our minimum wage in January 1st of this year to $10.20 an hour. The federal is still $7.25 per hour, and it's been that way since 2009. What you need to do, if you don't know your state's minimum wage, Google whatever state you're in, minimum wage, and it'll pop up for you. The Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor maintains that for you. There's even a spreadsheet of every state in the minimum wage, but it's an easy Google search. But whatever your state is, if it's higher than federal, state supersedes federal. If federal's higher than your state, then you pay federal. Whichever of the two numbers is the highest is the one that you pay for minimum wage. Non-exempt employees, Fair Labor Standards Act also determines the definition of exemption, and I've included that handout in your back binder as well. So non-exempt employees must be paid overtime at 1.5 times their regular salary after 40 hours in a work week. And it's important to understand that you, as the employer, define your work week. So if you're open Monday through Saturday, and you're closed on Sunday, you select which of those 5 days are the standard work week for your employee. Or which, if they work less than 8 hours a day, then those 6 days is your work week. If you're closed Sunday and Monday, your work week is going to be Tuesday through Saturday. But you define that based on the business that you have. The thing that's required is it needs to be fixed and reoccurring. You can't change the employee's work week every single week. That's the government's going to go, wait a minute, what are you doing? But it needs to be 7 consecutive 24-hour periods. So we have 2 days that are the employees off, and then we have 5 or 6 days, depending upon how many hours they work a day, where they work 40 hours within that work week. One of the recent amendments to the Fair Labor Standards Act is the break time for nursing mothers. That was added about 7 years ago, and it's part of Section 7. So the break time is up to 1 year after the birth of the child as needed, and the requirement is that you provide a place other than a break room that's shielded from view from coworkers and from the public. So it needs to be private and discreet and available to mothers as needed. And yes, questions?
So if you don't have that place in your existing business, you're not required to build a special facility.
That's correct. So if you have a private office with a wooden door and no windows that employees or owners can see through, you can give the employee access to that office. And I had a nursing recruiter, and she would just shut her door and put a sign on that said private, and we knew when the door was shut and the private sign was up, do not knock, and she would open the door when she was available to help people again. So it can be a current office, it just needs to be a private location that others can't walk by and look into through a window. Yes?
We have done doctor's office,
Mm-hmm.
and we have done an exam room.
Oh, sure.
And put a note in the door.
Right.
Does this include pumping?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, it would be pumping because it's not a
Right, exactly, yes. Right, yeah. And usually, most mothers bring a discreet container that they can keep in the refrigerator in the break room. And so it's, I don't think I've ever had a mother ask for a private refrigerator. Yes?
Is it on or off the clock for that?
It's off the clock, but it's available to them.
It's what?
Are
they on the clock during this break time?
Well, the employees that I had were exempt, and so it was paid, but it can be unpaid. Yeah. But double check your state. Yeah, say double check your state.
How long is the break? Like, is there a required time? I mean, is there a reasonable time?
Usually 10, 15 minutes is pretty normal, maybe 20 at most.
Once, twice a day?
Oh, it's as needed. I was going to say, let's see, probably 2 to 3 times a day at most. Yeah, a couple times a day. It's usually not excessive. Yes.
I'm just going to put my 2 cents in. Just
Please.
because I'm currently doing this in New York. It's written in our handbook that every employee, regardless if you're pumping or not, or you need cigarette breaks, you're allowed 1 hour of time. So,
Okay.
how we've incorporated the pumping and nursing mother is that they get like it's kind of up to their discretion, and it has to be cohesive with the work day. You can't be in the middle of appointment and decide
Right.
you need to pump or take your child or however your situation is.
Right.
So what I do that works for my employer and our staff is I have a half-hour break for lunch, and then I take 2 15-minute breaks, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. If it's not cohesive with the day because we have surgeries or appointments, I just skip it. I don't make it a big deal. But your employer just needs to give you that option to have it, and I'm not paid for that time. I call it.
You clock out then? Yeah. Yes.
But I believe it is your right, even if it's busy and you're in the middle of surgery.
Yeah, it is your right, but.
Yeah,
it is your right to do that, I just try to take into consideration that. Some people might not, I'm hungry to buy, but I don't do that.
And I've never had an employee do that. Every employee that has taken advantage of this law has been very thoughtful and considerate about coworkers, the clients that they serve. It just hasn't been a problem. But do research what your state requirements are. And most handbooks will spell out whether it's paid or unpaid. The other amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act was the equal pay provision, which requires that we pay the similar wages for similar work, and that there's no discrepancies based on or gender, excuse me. And it's typically gender where we see the discrepancies. They do allow pay differences based on seniority system. So if someone has been with your practice for 7 years and someone else is a new hire, they're doing like work, they have similar working conditions, based on merit increases, you would expect that the 7-year employee is going to make more than the new hire. And that's completely fine with the Equal Pay Act. Merit increases are usually based on performance. So if you have differentiation between a man and a woman doing similar job, they've both been with you 6 years, one of them has all meets expectations, the other one is exceeds, you would expect the person with the consistent exceeds performance is going to make a little bit more than the person who meets expectations. So that's what they mean by merit system, is you can have pay for performance. We've been talking earlier about workers who are paid for the quality and quantity of work that they do. That's another type of pay for performance, and that would be a difference that would be allowed. And then starting salary based on prior experience would be another reason that there might be differences in pay, and that would be completely appropriate. Yeah. Any questions on that? A lot of people assume that vacation, holiday, sick pay, severance pay is covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it's not. This is good business, and in order to be competitive in the marketplace, most practices offer at least some combination of these benefits to their employees. Whether or not you offer severance pay that's a little less common in practices or your vet hospitals, but either some combination of vacation, sick days, offering some paid time off for the holidays is usually pretty common in the marketplace that you're competing for candidates. Some practices will offer a a pay differential for weekend or holiday work. Is there anyone here that's doing that today? For a holiday? Yeah. How much are you offering?
We do, they get a paid holiday. We have whatever the main federal holidays are.
Mhm.
Everybody gets that as a bonus, like a day. No, it's a regular rate. You just get 8 hours add on to your paycheck.
Okay, great. For holidays, great.
Whether
Thanks.
they're not working that.
What do you-
Holidays are time and a half.
Oh, if they're working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then overnight and evenings and weekends, it breaks down to 3 different ones. It's either 10, 15, or 20% of differential of your salary working those different shifts.
Okay. And based on whether it's weekday, and then the shifts?
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you. MJ.
Our holiday pay is double.
Double? Wow.
And we
That's
offer a
generous.
shift differential. Take an instance, it's $2 an hour between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. and CSR is $1 an hour.
Okay, so $2 or $1 an hour for the night shift. Thank you. Any other examples? Great. Pay increases, merit increases, fringe benefits are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. That's based on the financial position of your practice and your ability to pay. So merits usually, that pool adjusts every year based on the financial performance. And the discharge notice might be state law. It's typically not federal. I know California, I believe, is still requiring that employees are given their last paycheck on their last day. A lot of other states, it's the regular payroll, and you just mail it to their home after the last day. But it's the severance check or the final check is processed as just a regular part of payroll. Are there any other states that have unique laws regarding employees who have resigned in their pay practices? Yes, MJ.
7 business days. It changed
Arizona.
from 3 a couple of years ago. Yeah.
7 business days, okay.
Or 7 Saturdays and Sundays. You know.
So you have to keep very good records. Oh, goodness, wow. Well, that helps. This is the record keeping that's required by the Fair Labor Standards Act. Most of you, whether you're processing payroll within your practice or using an outside vendor to process your payroll, these are standard payroll records that you're keeping. So there shouldn't be. Are there any surprises there? I was going to say that should be pretty routine. Be sure to Google your state's wage and hour laws. The government, because there was a question about where do we find this information. The government does a great job of keeping its website current. And if you put in your state wage and hour laws that are specific, it will provide you with a well-written, easy-to-understand document that you can follow. In Colorado, we pay 1.5 regular pay rate for work in excess of either 40 hours a week, which is consistent with the federal law. We also have 12 hours a day, which is unique to Colorado, or to our state law. That's not federal. And then anyone who works 12 consecutive hours without regard to starting and ending of the workday. So if they work 6 hours, so from 6 p.m. to midnight and then midnight to 6 a.m., they would be eligible for some overtime for that as well. You can take out work-free meal periods and deduct that from the 40 hours because that's not considered part of that 40-hour. Whether it's 30 minutes or an hour, it's not part of that calculation. But if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to Google your state's wage and hour laws to see if there's any differences between what your state requires in the federal law. We've been talking about bonus pay. Typically, it's linked to the performance of the employee or the performance of the hospital or the practice, and it should only be paid when the goal's achieved. And that can be the hardest thing, is when you start a bonus plan for the first time and then your practice doesn't achieve the goals and the employees go, oh, and it is disappointing. But then you talk about, we came so close. Let's talk about what's a realistic and attainable goal for next year. And how do we build on that? And you might do something other than paying the bonus and have a luncheon or something to celebrate the hard work of the team. But bonus is expected to be linked to risk, but the risk should be clearly defined in your bonus plan. So it should be a specific amount or a percentage. Most bonuses are paid once. It's different than commissions, which are typically a monthly payment. This is a one-time payment based on the performance of the practice. And it doesn't, it's not added to the base pay, so it doesn't have an impact on your salary, which is different than merit. So merit's a percentage increase to base pay. It does impact your ongoing and your future budget. Typically, employees who meet their performance goals are eligible for the budgeted merit increase, and I use the example of 3%. If they exceed their performance goals, we give them a slightly higher increase so that we have pay for performance. A couple of plans that I've worked with, and most plans, if you don't meet expectations, you're not eligible for a merit. In some companies, it's a one-time opportunity. You either meet it or you don't. And if your performance is below expectations, you wait till next year to be considered for merit. In other organizations, we would set performance goals to improve performance over the next 6 months. We would conduct a 6-month review. If they're meeting expectations at that point, they're eligible for a prorated merit. So they would get 1.5% instead of 3%. And that's a reward and an encouragement for the employee to improve their performance rather than waiting a year to be rewarded and recognized. Both are legal. It's what's the philosophy of your practice and what works well for you. But I've never done a retroactive increase because of the performance problems. You can't erase them, so I don't go backwards. What are all of you doing on merit? Are you using either of these approaches? Are you doing something completely different? Some people have a cost of living adjustment where everyone gets the same percentage. It's not linked to performance at all. That's another option. What are you doing today? Everyone's in the post-lunch coma.
We do merit increases on an annual basis.
Okay, so it's annual and then you wait till next year. Yeah, that's very common. Okay. And this does impact your financial statement going forward. Comp time off is a little more challenging, and this is one that an area that's been given a lot of attention because it's been misinterpreted. So comp time for non-exempt employees, it has to be within the same work week that they've worked the 40 hours. So if you have an employee that by noon Friday has already worked 40 hours for that week, as the employer, you have a choice. You can give them the afternoon off. They're already getting their 40 hours of pay. So that afternoon of time off is considered comp time. You're not going to deduct money from their wages. They get an afternoon off. They get 4 hours to do shopping, run errands, whatever they want to do. Your other option is if they've worked their 40 hours by noon Friday, you can have them work the full day, but you need to give them 4 hours at time and a half. And where we've run into problems in the past is people thought they could carry comp time over from work week to work week. And I've had companies that they allowed their employees to accrue 40 hours of comp time over the last 6 months and take that in lieu of vacation. Well, that's not in compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that's where in audits people were receiving fines, is because with non-exempt employees, if they work more than the 40 hours, you have to pay them time and a half. That's the federal law. You can give them time off and not it doesn't count against their attendance records. It's considered time off, and they still get the same 40 hours. Are there any questions about that? Because there's been confusion about that recently. And Wage and Hour is having a grand time auditing it. So. Okay, great. Oh, and some people, for your exempt employees, if you've got an exempt employee who's not eligible for overtime, they're working a lot of overtime, you can give them comp time as a reward. They still earn the same salary that they always do, so that's a benefit, that's an option that's available for you, but that's strictly your discretion. Here's some guidelines for travel and training for non-exempt employees. So paid time and what's included in the overtime calculation is traveling to an office other than your practice or your hospital. So if you require them to go someplace else, and then you pay the difference between the travel time to the office and the additional time that it took for them to get to the new location that you've asked them to go to. Or it's required work-related training seminars that you've asked them to attend, you're paying for it, you expect them to attend. We would pay for that, and we would pay for their travel to get there. What's not considered paid time, and it's not counted in the hours for overtime, is travel to and from their home to your practice or your hospital. They're required to get to work. That's their responsibility. And if they attend school on their own initiative, even if it's a course that relates to your practice and it's something they're doing on their own, that's not your responsibility. You don't need to pay for that. Any questions about that? Let's see, so one of the comp questions, is it better to start at a higher wage or start low and after milestones are achieved? Depends on how competitive your marketplace is. So if you have a shortage of vet techs, I would make sure that you're paying at a rate that you can retain them. If there's someone who's right out of school and you know you're going to spend a lot of time training them, it's perfectly fine to bring them in close to the minimum, and as they gain those skills, move them up within your salary range after they've completed their training. How to compete with other lower paid positions. So tell me about that. You've got your work environment, you have your hours that you work, the clientele that you work with. I would talk about, our culture, our work environment.
So it's going to be for the lower paid employees that they have the option of working at Chipotle for $15 an hour, and obviously they're there at your practice hopefully because they want to be there because of the animals and they, it's part of their career path, but they can be a little bit challenging to compete with that on a level field. Texas minimum wage is $7.25 an hour.
Oh, so it's the same as federal.
Yeah, it is. So it's horrible. So a lot. Those entry level positions are very, very, very low pay.
Right.
So it's just hard to keep those employees because.
Are you able to pay a little bit above minimum?
Well, if it's the high school student, they get paid closer to the minimum.
Okay.
I think our minimum is around $8.50. Where we start, but where we started, I don't know right now. But yeah, it's hard to retain those employees as you're going out because we just are in our area. There's a very big shortage of staffing.
Okay. Well, one thing you might do is, if you're starting people close to minimum, is create a development plan for your new hires, and as they gain each skill, give them another 50 cents or 75 cents an hour more. And I would do that throughout the year. So they're saying, I learned a skill, I received a pay increase, and that'll help you with retention and encourage them to learn and develop those new skills so that they stay with you. They've done a lot of studies around the millennials. Waiting a year to reward them for work that they've done doesn't always work. So those smaller incremental increases has been more successful, especially for entry-level positions.
So have you ever compensated, not just picking up a skill, but maybe they took CE hours or they took online coursework and based it like completing a 4-hour module or do something based on that?
Sure.
To the same degree?
I would ask them to demonstrate the new skill on the job so that you can see that they weren't playing video games while the webinar was running, and that they paid attention to it and learned something from it and are applying it at work. Yeah, absolutely. Benefits, how to compete without them. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That was me too.
Oh, okay.
So we're in a smaller practice, so our requirements of what we had to provide the benefits were pretty mean. And with the pay also being pretty low,
Right.
The corporate practices could cherry pick our employees pretty quickly, and they could offer those big umbrella benefits. So we competed on the personal level. I mean, what our hospital could offer as far as quality of life care,
Right, exactly.
that kind of thing. But it's still it's a kind of nails on the chalkboard thing in a lot of small practices, because the larger corporations, I work with those larger corporations now, so I'm not trying to shoot arrows at them.
Oh, sure. But it's a challenge.
It's really hard. I mean, because I also was a VCA employee at one point.
Right.
The benefits were just like raining from the sky. So,
Well,
seriously.
So you might think about flex schedule. What can you do that would help with quality of life that's not going to cost you? So flex schedule would be one. Bringing food in would be another one. Well, that has a small cost associated with it, but it's a one-time expense. But I would think I would ask the team what kind of quality of life programs would be the most impactful to them, and if we were to implement 2 or 3, what would be the most meaningful, and get their input. And they're usually pretty candid. They'll tell you what would mean a lot. Yeah, sure. Let's see. And we've talked about inexperience versus and lower pay. So is there, and when they become more, when your inexperienced, lower paid hires become more valuable than your experienced staff. So that's when I do a pay equity adjustment. So I look at what's the skills on my team, where are they being paid, and if I have a new employee that's leapfrogged over my senior folks, I do a one-time pay increase based on performance, and I explain to the employee, here's the performance that you've demonstrated, and we really value what you do, so we're giving you an increase outside of merit to recognize the skills that you've learned or brought to the position. And so pay equity is just a one-time adjustment to recognize that person. National averages, I would get on the VHMA website and see if they have market data, comp data that's available to you. I don't know if AHA has, do you guys have comp salary information available on your website on AHA?
Different compensation benefits packages for different staff levels, for different demographics, and so basically you find out where this is in there.
Okay. Yeah. So I would go to those sites for market data. Standard benefits package is typically medical insurance, and dental vision is optional. A lot of companies offer it, but not all. Usually medical is the primary benefit that's offered. Vacation, sick leave, and holiday pay are other pretty standard benefits that you would see in most companies. The larger hospitals, larger practices can offer a cafeteria plan. Usually you would contract with an outside vendor to help you manage that, because those can be pretty complex. But that's certainly a nice option for larger organizations that have the ability to pay an outside resource. The total comp reports also, if you're working with an outside payroll provider, I would ask them if they provide a total comp report. Some of them will provide that free of charge. Others, it's a small increase. It's a nice thing to offer to your employees so they can see the value of the benefits plus their compensation that your practice provides to them. So it's a nice communication tool, and I usually only do that once a year, so you can keep your costs down. Giving employees cash to waive a benefit. One of the things you need to be sure is that they have benefits somewhere else if they waive yours, because we need to report that we're providing benefits for all of our employees, or they're getting them through another source, and that's part of your annual reporting to the government. So we want to make sure that we're not incenting people to waive those. Right.
When you said it's report to the government.
Right, I was talking about medical. What was the question referring to?
We are not required to give medical insurance with under 50 employees.
Oh, sure, okay, yeah, so you're
most of
under.
us are not really required.
That's right.
To give medical.
Right, I was thinking of the hospitals, which are larger, yes. Yes. I said, you can do that. It's uncommon, but it's an option that's available to you. Yeah. Lifestyle changes, how to change pay.
That was me.
Oh, thank you.
Going on the one above it, where I think it was James asked how would you calculate and give cash to someone if they didn't want to take your benefits? And then I said, well, what if they change their mind and want to get back on your benefits? How would you change pay and go back?
Oh, okay. So are we talking medical insurance?
Yeah, so
okay.
I would think just not do it, but.
Right, for most medical plans, you have a qualifying condition, which is marriage, birth of a child, divorce, a death, or change in employment. So you would need a qualifying condition to make them available. If they were on their spouse's plan, the spouse lost coverage, that would be for most plans, that's a qualifying option, and they could join at that time. Yeah, but it's usually the qualifying provisions are stated in the plan document.
And there's generally an open enrollment.
Right, and there's an annual open enrollment period, so this would be in between enrollment periods.
Excuse me.
Absolutely,
The
yes.
question above, I think, the question is, it may not be legal practice, but some employees say, I don't want health insurance.
That's what our stuff to be for
doctors
doctors on our way.
Because I'm not going to take the insurance. And then I think the question below then referred to, well, what if they say they take the insurance, or they don't take the insurance, you give them a pay raise, and then they want the insurance later on. Is it even legal? Is that a bad practice?
I've never done it. Can you offer them a higher salary if they don't take benefits? Sure. I just try to have that be a personal decision and tell the employee, look, here's the benefit options that are available to you. Whether you choose to take advantage of them or not is your choice. But I'm not sure why I should pay you more money as your employer for a choice that you've made. So I don't pay them.
I've been reluctant to do it because if I did it for one employee,
You got to do it for everybody. Yes, and I just don't see the advantage to you as the employer to compensate them for a choice that they've made. You've provided everyone in your practice with benefits, and after that, it's a personal choice, and I kind of let them be responsible for those. But if you want to pay them, I mean, that's a practice decision, but you're right, you need to be consistent.
Part of the reason you give benefits is because it doesn't go to your payroll tax. And so, you know, if you're doing that, you're behind more than you think you are.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. It's not a practice I've ever used, but if it's what's common in your market and you need to do that to be competitive, that's a decision that the leadership team of your practice would need to make. Let's see. We've talked about different approaches for performance-based pay. Are there any other questions about that? Oh, for hourly employees who fall below the required hours for benefits, and this also, so typically benefits stop and start at the beginning of the month. That's usually part of your plan document as well. And if the employee is going to their hours fall below, and it's a one-time situation, I generally don't touch their benefits. If they have taken a permanent reduction in hours, and now they're working 28 hours instead of the plan's requirement of 32. I explained to the employee before they make that change that they're no longer eligible for medical, and most plan documents will say we'll carry them through the end of the month, and then they'll need to find other insurance at the beginning of the month. But typically a plan document is on a monthly basis, and I let the employee know that the change in hours will impact that. Yes, MJ?
The Affordable Care Act changed all that for people who have more than the 50, or more than the limit of employees. So if you have I think more than 50 full-time employees, that does not apply.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 30 hours and then, or 130 hours a month, and you can actually, there's a calculation period where you may actually have to keep them on the insurance up to 6 months in the worst case scenario.
Oh, right. So you're talking about COBRA? They would be. Okay. Okay. Now, yes, and you reminded me, when an employee is no longer eligible, they are also eligible for COBRA, which is 18 months where they pay the full benefit as well as the administrative cost. Paid time off, best practices. What questions do you have around that? Yes.
So in our hospital, our policy is you need to accrue a certain amount of paid time off to be able to request off. Otherwise, you switch your shift with another coworker. So I have a lot of younger employees that just want to request off without being paid, and we don't allow that because then people will just take off whenever they want it. Is that typically how people do it, or choose up and shoot off? I can't see how you can.
So there.
Not argument, but it's a common conversation that I have with our staff members that just because they put a time request off slip in, they don't have the PTO accrued, you don't get it.
Right, and that's typically how it's managed, is you don't have a negative balance for PTO. If you do allow them to carry a negative balance, that should be in writing so that they understand, because some people will let them carry a negative balance for a month, but their accrual the following month should cover the hours that they took the prior month. But usually it's not any longer than 30 days.
I'm requesting off, don't pay me, that's okay.
That's up to you. You don't have to approve that. Yeah, I'll say. Right, yeah, and you don't have to approve that if you don't want to. It would, if they don't show up, then it would be an unauthorized absence, and that would count towards their attendance. Yeah, yeah, but that's at your discretion. Yeah. Let's see, we've talked about hourly employees. Oh, and then contracts. I would encourage you to talk to VHMA and AHA for copies of contracts that you can use for your vets. Absolutely.
You talk about like time off and leaves and sick leave. So they want the day off, you give it to them. Oh, I'm sick today. You know.
You can ask for a doctor's note.
Yeah. So just with every time you could require them to go to the doctor.
Well, if they've asked for a day off, you told them no, and they call in sick, I would ask for a doctor's note because that's kind of suspicious. Yeah, if you think they're.
What about somebody that's constantly migraine, a lot of migraine, you know, and they're just calling in at least once a week. But the point being, can you at some point say, look, your supposed illness is affecting how we do business, so I need for only just a document because they bring me up and oh, she had it. But, you know, this is obviously becoming a problem for you. Can I request them to, because I told them I would request that I not just get cash to say, hey, but what is your diagnosis? I mean, what are you planning, not your diagnosis,
Right.
but what is the plan for this person? Is this person really disabled or should they be able to work? Because they're missing so much work. Is that all right?
So there's a couple of things. You can talk to them about their attendance. I would not talk to them about the illness and let them know that you need them to be at work on a consistent basis. And if they need accommodations, they need to bring you a note from the doctor, but otherwise, you're expecting them to be at work on a regular basis and focus on the attendance piece of it. And then it's up to them to bring you accommodations if they need it. Yeah. Yes, Grace.
Minimum requirements for each job says that you won't miss more than a certain percentage of your scheduled shifts. And so if they start to fall over that, they're no longer meeting the minimum requirements of the job.
Yeah, it would be based on attendance and availability to perform their duties. Yeah. Which is an attendance issue. And it's up to them to bring you an accommodation if they need it. It's not your responsibility to ask for that. They need to provide it. But we can address the attendance. Yeah. Okay. Well, we have had a robust conversation, and I know you are getting anxious to have a break before your next presenter. Are there any questions that you have about onboarding? I've got some tips and in your handout for you. Some things to think about is, in addition to technical skills, what are some of the unwritten rules for your practice? How do we work together? How do we communicate with one another? What's our expectations for customer service, for the owners, for the animals that we're taking care of? And explain to them what success looks like for your practice, and make sure that people are taking them to lunch, that they're getting integrated into the team and the social aspect of the job, as well as learning the technical pieces of the job. Probationary period, 90 days is kind of standard. You can always extend it if you need to. 120 days is not uncommon. And onboarding a new graduate, I would visit with AHA and the VHMA and ask if they have guidelines or best practices that they can share from other veterinary hospitals or organizations about here's an onboarding process for someone right out of college, and see if I would think they would have tools to support you. Yes.
For new veterinary grads, you guys are going to see all 99% of them are going to ask for mentoring, and mentoring can mean a lot of different things to different new grads.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to ask them, what does mentoring mean to you? Because that could be anywhere from, please babysit me all the time, I don't know what I'm doing, or I just need a little bit of help on my surgery days. So I think you guys, if you're the higher vets, especially the new grads, if you don't offer mentoring, they probably are not going to take the job or not going to be happy, because most of them want that.
When it comes to it, what's a reasonable length of time? You're still paying them. So, I'm always on my husband because I'm like, you cannot take a veterinarian who's being paid $40,000 or $70,000 a year to go, 4 or 5 times a week with you.
So the one that I have now, I'm with her. I'm in the building almost every shift she's on. The reason is because I can't afford to lose her, and I need her to feel comfortable in practice before I let her go. And believe me, I don't want to be there babysitting her, but I kind of have to. She already left the job because she wasn't getting enough mentoring. So we're her second job now, 3 months out of school. So I made the commitment to decide to support her, and I did a 3-month review, and I'm doing a 6-month review coming up. And she just needs to know someone's there for her. And that's for her. She's a little needy. And I understand that.
So she would otherwise be working by herself?
No, she's with 2 other doctors.
Okay.
But I cannot.
Even with them there?
Well, they're helpful,
Yeah.
but I do not want to put that on them. I have not asked them to mentor. They do help, but I can't expect them to stop what they're doing.
Right.
Because they're doing their own thing. So.
And I share mentoring among the entire team, so it's not, I appreciate you doing that. Yeah, because that's a lot of work. But I'll put together a new hire schedule for the first month and share it with the team and say, sign up for what topics are you available to answer questions, and when are you available to spend time with this new hire. And it's the entire practices. responsibility to bring the new hire in and help them be successful, so then everybody takes their piece of it, and it's not so onerous on one person.
So would you make like just a written and an agreed upon saying that, you know, we would always have attorneys and
Right.
you know, but the whole idea of, you know, he's going to have to do footwork, oh, she wants to go too, you know, we'll support her the time she's gone. I can't have my correction doctor,
Right.
doctor doing what doctor's job.
Right.
You know, we just take that time, or settle, how do I settle them?
Oh, well, sure.
Because
Well,
they, you give them an expectation of, yes, I'm interviewing and always interview, which is not good.
Right.
But, you know, the idea that you're going to job shadow is
Mhm.
different from industry.
Right. And so I would ask her what skills haven't you observed or gained from the first 3 mentorings that you want to get from this one? And what do we need to do to successfully transition you to being autonomous?
I would also recommend Simon Sinek's Millennial video, if any of you haven't watched it. It's very insightful about millennials. Simon, S-I-N-E-K. He's the guy who did the why, find the why. And if you just search on YouTube for millennial, you'll find it.
Well, thank you so much for your energy and your conversation today. My contact information is in the back, so if you ever have a question or I can provide some support, please feel free to reach out to me, and good luck with the rest of your day. Thank you so much.